The sky above Musutafu split without warning. No explosion. No thunder. Just a hairline fracture in reality itself, a wound across the afternoon atmosphere that twisted light into geometries it was never meant to hold. Pedestrians on the street below stopped mid-stride phones, lowering from their ears as they stared upward at the impossible thing happening above them. The tear spread like cracked glass, silent and wrong, before sealing itself with a sound like rushing wind played backwards. Then nothing. Just blue sky and scattered clouds, as if the world had decided the last 10 seconds hadn't happened. Except for the man now standing in the middle of UA High School's industrial testing ground, looking down at his red gloves with the expression of someone who'd just missed his bus. Saitama turned slowly, taking in his surroundings. Concrete. Steel framework. Training equipment scattered across an open lot that smelled like motor oil and burnt rubber. Beyond the chain-link fence, a city stretched toward the horizon. Modern, clean, bustling with the kind of energy that suggested people here actually enjoyed their lives. Which was nice, he supposed. Good for them. He'd been reaching for a discount flyer. The supermarket by his apartment had been advertising a sale on vegetables, and he'd wanted to check the dates before committing to the trip. Then the world had simply changed around him, reality folding in on itself like a badly shuffled deck of cards. Now he was here, wherever here was. A woman walked past on the sidewalk beyond the fence. She had horns. Actual horns, curved and polished, growing from her temples like they belonged there. She was talking on a phone, gesturing with her free hand, completely unbothered by the fact that she had horns. Behind her, a man whose arms were covered in what looked like tree bark was walking a dog. The dog had 2 tails. Saitama scratched his head. This was going to be one of those days. 50 meters to his left, UA's training facility hummed with controlled chaos. Students in colorful costumes moved through obstacle courses, under the watchful eyes of instructors with megaphones and clipboards. Some of them were flying. Others were shooting what looked like ice or fire from their hands. One kid seemed to be made entirely of rocks. Saitama had seen weird things before. This was just a different flavor of weird. The training drill, currently in progress, involved a decommissioned zero-pointer, a 3-story battle robot with reinforced armor plating and a defensive design meant to simulate urban disaster scenarios. The machine had been running its programmed route perfectly for the past 2 hours, responding to student attacks with measured counterforce, careful never to actually harm anyone. UA's safety protocols were legendary. Nothing ever went wrong during these exercises, until something did. A cascade failure rippled through the zero-pointer's neural network. Combat protocols activated without authorization. Safety limiters disengaged. The robot's optical sensors flooded red, and its targeting matrix began scanning for threats according to parameters that hadn't been active since its military service days. It found threats everywhere. The students were threats. The instructors were threats. The civilians on the street beyond the fence, waiting at a crosswalk, were threats. The robot's arm cannon swiveled toward the crosswalk and began charging. People noticed the whine of gathering energy before they noticed the weapon itself. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Someone screamed, and that scream became a catalyst, triggering the instinct that had kept humans alive through millennia of predation. Run. The crowd scattered, parents grabbing children, elderly, stumbling as younger bodies shoved past them in panic. A woman with butterfly wings tried to fly, but couldn't gain altitude fast enough. A teenager with enhanced speed ran straight into a fire hydrant and went down hard. The crosswalk devolved into chaos, people trampling each other in their desperation to escape the machine that was now tracking their movements with the cold precision of military hardware. Saitama watched this unfold with his hands in his pockets. The robot was broken. Obviously. Its movements were jerky, its targeting erratic. Someone would fix it. Someone always fixed these things. That's what people did. They fixed broken machines and cleaned up messes and made sure civilians didn't get hurt during training exercises. But the people running didn't know that. They just knew a giant robot was pointing a weapon at them, and that weapon was glowing brighter with each passing second. Saitama sighed and started walking toward the crosswalk. Not running. Running seemed excessive. The situation didn't feel urgent, so much as inconvenient, like arriving at a store 5 minutes after closing time. Annoying, sure, but not worth getting worked up about. The zero-pointer's cannon reached full charge. Energy crackled along its barrel, the air around it distorting from heat. Targeting lock achieved. Firing sequence initiated. 3 seconds to discharge. Saitama stepped between the machine and the fleeing civilians. He looked up at the robot's chassis, noting the craftsmanship. Well-built. Solid welds, hydraulic joints that moved smoothly despite the malfunction. Someone had put real effort into designing this thing. It seemed a shame to break it. He threw a light jab. His fist connected with the zero-pointer's chest plate just as the cannon fired. For a fraction of a second, both events existed simultaneously, fist against metal energy, leaving barrel. Then physics caught up with what had just happened. The entire robot folded inward. Not crushed, not dented, folded like origami made of military-grade steel. The chest plate collapsed into itself, creating a compression point that pulled the rest of the structure along with it. Arms tore free at the shoulder joints. Legs buckled and snapped. The head unit launched straight up, trailing smoke and sparks, its trajectory so perfect it might have been calculated. It arced through the air for 3 full seconds before landing in a recycling bin, 3 blocks away with a hollow clang that echoed between buildings. The cannon's energy blast dissipated harmlessly into the sky, scattering into particles of light that looked almost pretty as they faded. The robot's torso, now compressed into a sphere roughly the size of a basketball, hit the ground and rolled to a stop at Saitama's feet. He looked down at it, then back at where the machine had been standing. A few pieces of shrapnel were still falling, clattering against pavement in a descending scale of metallic notes. He brushed a fleck of paint from his glove. The crowd had gone silent. Not the silence of relief, but the silence of brains trying to process information that didn't fit any existing category. People stood frozen mid-run, some with 1 foot still raised, staring at the empty space where a 3-story combat robot had existed moments before. Saitama turned back toward the street, already scanning for anyone who looked helpful. Someone who might know where he was, or at least point him toward a transit station. Several civilians crept toward the compressed metal sphere, filming from cautious distances. A few braver ones glanced at Saitama's retreating back, whispering among themselves. "Which agency is he from? I don't recognize the costume. That technique, did he use a quirk?" "No, I'm telling you he's not in the registry. I checked the Hero app. There's no yellow suit guy anywhere near Musudafu." Phones came out again, not for the destroyed robot this time, but for the man who'd walked away from it like he'd stepped off an escalator. People zoomed in on his face, on the gloves, on the plain cape that didn't match any known hero design. Someone pulled up the public hero database and began scrolling through profiles. Nothing. No match on licensed pros, no match on trainees. No undocumented vigilantes with similar descriptions. He's not registered. Then what was he doing in a restricted training zone? Maybe he's underground hero or a villain. Nobody could agree, but they could all tell one thing. Whoever he wasn't supposed to be here. And nobody had any idea how to categorize a man who could erase a zero-pointer with 1 casual punch. Behind him, the silence broke. Gasps. Whispers. Someone's phone clattered against concrete. A surveillance camera mounted on a nearby building had captured everything. The footage streamed directly into UA's security network, where it triggered an immediate cascade of alerts that climbed the chain of command faster than any human reaction time. Within 90 seconds, the video reached Principal Nezu's office. Nezu was a creature of enhanced intelligence, housed in a body that resembled a white mouse. He sat in an oversized chair behind a desk, cluttered with reports, and he watched the footage 3 times in a row without blinking. On the 4th viewing, he picked up his phone. At Hero Commission headquarters, analysts were already running the footage through their threat assessment matrix. Biometric scanners found the target. Male, adult, no unusual features. The system ran a quirk analysis, searching for energy signatures, biological enhancement markers, genetic mutations, anything that would explain what had just happened. The results came back negative. No quirk detected, no energy readings, no biological abnormalities. The system flagged the subject as quirkless and moved on to force analysis. The algorithm attempted to calculate the energy required to destroy a zero-pointer with a single punch. It ran the numbers, checked its work, ran them again. The results didn't make sense. The computational model kept suggesting that either the footage was fabricated or the fundamental laws of physics had temporarily suspended themselves within a 3-meter radius of the subject. A junior analyst stared at his screen, then at the senior officer standing behind him. The senior officer stared at the screen for another 10 seconds. Before reaching for the emergency classification system, the file updated. Level Black Unknown Threat. National Priority. On street level, Saitama had reached the corner. He looked left, then right, studying the unfamiliar roads with the focused concentration of someone genuinely lost. The city stretched in all directions, modern and vast, and completely foreign. No landmarks he recognized. No signs pointing toward anything useful. A woman with butterfly wings gave him a wide berth as she passed, clutching her purse against her chest. Her eyes stayed locked on him the entire time, only breaking contact when she nearly walked into a street sign. A man whose skin flickered between solid and translucent crossed to the opposite sidewalk, his expression carefully neutral. Children pointed and whispered, tugging on their parents' sleeves until being shushed and pulled away. Saitama scratched the back of his head. This was getting annoying. He just wanted directions. Maybe someone who could explain what was happening. Why people here had horns and wings and skin that changed consistency. Instead, everyone seemed to think he'd done something wrong. Had he done something wrong? The robot had been about to hurt people. Stopping it seemed like the obvious choice. Maybe property damage was treated differently here. Maybe robots were expensive. He probably should have asked first. Too late now. He shrugged and kept walking, picking a direction at random. If this place had heroes, and judging by the costumes and the training facility, it definitely had heroes. Someone would show up eventually to ask questions. That's how these things usually worked. Someone did something unusual. People panicked, heroes investigated everyone, sorted out the misunderstanding, and life continued. Behind him, the crowd was starting to move again. Phones came out. Videos were recorded. Statements were given to arriving police officers who looked at the compressed sphere of metal and then at each other with expressions that suggested this was above their pay grade. The footage was already being uploaded to social media, passed between chat groups, analyzed by amateur commentators with heroic aspirations and too much free time. By sunset, half the city would know about the bald man in the yellow suit who'd turned a combat robot into scrap metal without breaking stride. They would give him a name. They would argue about whether he was villain or hero threat or savior human or something else entirely. They would demand investigations, containment protocols, answers to questions that didn't have answers yet. But right now, in this moment, Saitama was just a man trying to find his way home. He walked down an unfamiliar street in an unfamiliar world, hands in his pockets, wondering idly if this place had sales on vegetables and whether the currency he was carrying would even work here. And in a darkened room miles away, someone was already watching. Someone who understood that what had just happened wasn't a glitch or a trick or a quirk being used creatively. Someone who recognized the signature of true power when he saw it, and who knew exactly what it meant for the careful balance he'd spent decades building. All for One leaned forward in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, and smiled. The footage hit the internet 17 minutes after the incident. Not the official version that was locked behind Hero Commission security protocols, flagged and buried under layers of classification that would take weeks to navigate. But 3 civilians had recorded the zero-pointer's destruction on their phones, and those videos weren't subject to any regulatory oversight. They went live on streaming platforms, social media hero analysis forums. Within an hour, they'd been viewed 2 million times. Within 3 hours, that number had tripled. The videos were short, grainy, shot from bad angles with shaking hands, but they showed enough. A man in a yellow suit, a casual stance, a punch that somehow folded a 3-story combat robot into something that could fit in a backpack. And then the man walking away, like nothing had happened, hands in his pockets, looking bored. The comment sections exploded. Is this real? Has to be edited. No way that's real. Check the timestamps. Multiple sources, same event. What quirk does that analysis says? Quirkless. Impossible. Nothing's impossible. That's not how quirks work. Maybe he's from overseas. Maybe he's not human. The debates raged. Amateur analysts froze frames, measured trajectories, calculated force ratios. Professional heroes weighed in with carefully worded statements that said nothing concrete. The Hero Commission issued a terse press release confirming an incident had occurred and was under investigation. Please remain calm. Do not approach the individual if cited. Report any information to the proper authorities. But the internet had already named him. Dozens of suggestions competed: the one punch, the baldy chrome dome, the yellow comet. The name that stuck came from a late-night forum post that captured something essential about the footage. The way the man had appeared without context, destroyed something massive without effort, and vanished back into the city like he'd never been there at all. The bald ghost. Yeah. No matter where he goes, Saitama always gets stuck with the nickname Baldy, and he absolutely hates it. By the second day, merchandise was being printed. Bootleg shirts with blurry screenshots. Memes comparing the ghost to various top heroes. Think pieces analyzing what this meant for quirk theory, for hero society, for the fundamental understanding of human potential. Someone created a tracking map, plotting supposed sightings across Musutafu. Most were false alarms: bald men in business suits, elderly civilians, cancer patients. But the map grew anyway, a web of unconfirmed reports that suggested the ghost was everywhere and nowhere. Saitama knew none of this. He'd spent the past 2 days walking through Musutafu, trying to understand the logic of this place. The city operated on rules that seemed familiar until they weren't. Traffic lights worked the same way. Money looked different, but served the same purpose. He'd found some coins in his pocket that apparently had value here, enough to buy a meal from a convenience store. People spoke Japanese, which was helpful, though they used terms he didn't recognize. Quirks, heroes, villains, commission, all might. That last one came up a lot. Posters on walls, commercials on outdoor screens, a symbol of peace apparently. A man with an impossible smile who saved people and made everything okay. Saitama had seen the merchandise action figures, lunch boxes, promotional tie-ins with everything from insurance companies to breakfast cereal. It seemed exhausting. Being a symbol, having people watch your every move, expecting you to solve their problems, to be something larger than human. Saitama had been a hero for 3 years now, and he'd never once thought of himself as a symbol of anything. He just hit things that needed hitting and went home. He wondered if this all-might person ever got tired. The neighborhood Saitama found himself in now was older than the commercial district buildings, weathered by time and neglect. Fewer heroes patrolled here. Fewer cameras. The kind of place where people minded their own business because getting involved meant complications nobody wanted. He'd been walking for hours, still trying to find someone who might know something about dimensional rifts or spatial anomalies or whatever had brought him here. Then he heard the screaming. It came from an alley 3 blocks east, the kind of sound that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. Not the scream of surprise or pain, but of pure terror. The scream of someone who knew they were about to die. Saitama turned toward it, without thinking, his pace increasing from a walk to something just short of a jog. Still not running. The situation probably didn't require running. But he moved with purpose now, following the sound through streets that had gone suddenly empty past shop windows, being hastily shuttered around a corner into an alley that smelled like rotting garbage and fear. The creature had its back to him. It stood 7 feet tall, humanoid, but wrong. Too many joints. Skin that looked like it had been grafted together from multiple sources, patches of different colors and textures, stretched over a frame that shouldn't have been able to support itself. Its brain was exposed, pulsing wetly in the afternoon light, contained by something that might have been glass or might have been hardened membrane. The creature had one hand wrapped around a man's throat, lifting him off the ground with casual strength, while the man clawed uselessly at its arm. Behind the creature, a woman and 2 children, huddled against a dumpster, frozen in that terrible moment between fight and flight, when the body hasn't yet decided which terror to embrace. Saitama walked up behind the creature and tapped it on the shoulder. The thing turned its face a nightmare of mismatched features. Eyes that didn't quite line up. A mouth full of teeth designed for different purposes. It looked at Saitama with something that might have been curiosity, its exposed brain pulsing faster. Then it dropped the man it was holding and lunged. Saitama slapped it. Not a punch. Not even really a hit. Just an open palm slap, the kind you might give an annoying mosquito. His hand connected with the creature's forehead, with a sound like a wet towel hitting concrete. The Nomu's head compressed, folding in on itself with geometric precision. The compression spread down through its neck, its torso, its limbs. Gravity and momentum working together to reduce 7 feet of bioengineered monster into a compact sphere roughly the size of a basketball. The sphere hit the alley floor with a meaty thump and rolled to a stop against a trash can. Saitama looked at it for a moment, then at his hand. Then back at the sphere. He'd been aiming for a light tap, something to stun the creature so he could pull it away from the civilians. Apparently he'd miscalculated. He turned to the family huddled against the dumpster. The mother was staring at him, her children pressed against her sides, all 3 of them wearing identical expressions of shock. "You okay?" Saitama asked. The woman's mouth moved, but no sound came out. The man on the ground was gasping. One hand pressed to his throat, eyes wide. He managed a nod that might have been gratitude or terror or both. Saitama nodded back. Good enough. He walked past them toward the alley's entrance, already thinking about where he should go next. Maybe find a library. Libraries usually had information about local geography. Maybe even scientific resources that could explain dimensional travel. Behind him, the woman found her voice. "Wait." He stopped, turning halfway. "Who are you?" Saitama considered the question. "Just passing through." "Are you a hero?" That question was more complicated. Was he a hero here? He was a hero back home, officially registered with the Hero Association and everything. But that was a different world, a different system. Here he didn't know the rules. Probably should figure that out before claiming any titles. "I guess," he said. Then he left, disappearing around the corner before the questions could continue. Above the alley, perched on a fire escape 3 stories up, a man watched him go. The man was thin, almost gaunt, with bandages wrapped around his face and arms. His eyes tracked Saitama's retreat with an intensity that bordered on hunger, taking in every detail. The casual walk, the complete lack of costume or declaration, the way he'd stopped a Nomu, a creature that required multiple pro-heroes to contain, with what looked like a lazy gesture. Stain had been hunting in this district for weeks, tracking false heroes who wore the title without earning it. He'd watched countless pretenders fail this exact test running from Nomus instead of fighting them, calling for backup instead of protecting civilians, putting their survival above their duty. He'd marked 3 heroes for elimination in this neighborhood alone. But this man, this bald stranger in the ridiculous yellow suit, he'd stopped mid-stride at the sound of a scream, had walked into danger. Without hesitation, had eliminated a threat that should have been beyond any individual fighter. And then he'd walked away without waiting for credit, without posing for cameras, without leveraging the moment into publicity. This was what All Might had been before the fame and merchandise and corporate sponsorships. Before hero work became a career instead of a calling. This was the real thing. Stain pulled out a knife and began sharpening it against the fire escape railing, the metallic rasp lost in the ambient city noise. He would watch this ghost, study him, determine if what he'd witnessed was genuine or an elaborate act. The world was full of people who could fake heroism for a single moment. But true heroes revealed themselves over time, through patterns, through choices made when nobody was watching. If this man was real, if he represented what heroes should be, then perhaps there was hope for this rotting system after all. If he was fake, Stain would add another name to his list. Below, civilians were emerging from hiding phones, out-recording the compressed Nomu, the alley, the space where the bald ghost had been. The footage would be online within minutes. The legend would grow. And somewhere in that vast digital conversation, in the spaces between disbelief and wonder, the truth would begin to take shape. Something had changed in Musutafu. Something that couldn't be explained by quirks or hero training or any existing framework. A variable that didn't fit the equation, and the city would have to decide what to do about it. Principal Nezu didn't sleep much. His enhanced intellect made rest feel inefficient. Time wasted that could be spent analyzing planning, solving the infinite puzzle of human behavior and institutional management. But even by his standards, the past 48 hours had been unusually wakeful. The files spread across his desk told a story that shouldn't exist. 3 separate incidents, 3 impossible outcomes. A training robot destroyed with what the physics department insisted was several orders of magnitude beyond human capability. A Nomu, a creature specifically engineered to withstand professional hero combat, reduced to a compact sphere by what witnesses described as a slap. And most recently, a convenience store robbery stopped when the suspect's gun had simply crumpled in his hand, the metal folding like paper, at the same moment a bald man in a yellow suit walked past outside. The suspect had surrendered immediately, too terrified to even run. Nezu picked up his teacup, found it empty, and set it down with a soft click against the saucer. The analysis reports from the Hero Commission were interesting in what they didn't say. Quirkless. No energy signature. No biological enhancement markers. Subject appears to be an ordinary human male, operating at physically impossible performance levels. Recommend immediate containment and study. That last part made Nezu's whiskers twitch with distaste. Containment. As if the individual in question was a specimen rather than a person. The commission had a habit of treating complicated problems like nail heads waiting for hammers, and it had cost them credibility more than once. No. This situation required a different approach. Something more subtle than containment. Something more respectful than study. He picked up his phone and dialed. Aizawa, I need you to find someone. 3 hours later, Eraserhead stood on a rooftop in the older district of Musutafu. watching a bald man browse the discount section of a street vendor's produce stand. The man was examining a cabbage with the focused intensity of someone making an important life decision. Aizawa had been a professional hero for long enough to recognize threats. Body language. Micro-expressions. The subtle tells that separated civilians from fighters, tourists from scouts, ordinary people from those who'd seen real violence. This man had none of those tells. His posture was relaxed to the point of sloppiness. His awareness of his surroundings seemed minimal. He hadn't looked up once since arriving at the stand. If Aizawa didn't know better, he'd classify the target as a completely ordinary civilian with no combat training whatsoever. Except Aizawa did know better. He'd watched the footage, all of it multiple angles, frame by frame. He'd seen what this man could do with a casual gesture. And that contradiction, the harmless appearance versus the incomprehensible capability, was exactly what made the situation fascinating. Also concerning, mostly concerning. Aizawa dropped from the rooftop using his capture weapon to control his descent and landed on the street with practiced silence. He approached the produce stand, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The man didn't look up, didn't react, just kept examining vegetables with that same focused intensity. "The cabbage is fine," Aizawa said, "but the vendor charges double if he thinks you're a tourist." The man looked up. Brown eyes, plain features, an expression of mild interest. "How can you tell I'm a tourist? You've been staring at that cabbage for 3 minutes. It's a good cabbage." Aizawa found himself without an immediate response to that. The man set the vegetable down carefully, exactly where he'd found it, and turned to face Aizawa fully. There was no tension in the movement, no preparation for conflict. Just a slight shift of weight that somehow conveyed polite attention. "My name is Eraserhead," Aizawa said, deciding directness was the better approach. "I'm a pro-hero. Principal Nezu of UA High School would like to speak with you." The man considered this. "Am I in trouble?" "No." "Then why does a principal want to talk to me?" "Good question." Aizawa had asked Nezu the same thing during the briefing. Nezu's answer had been characteristically cryptic, because I'm curious, and curiosity is the foundation of understanding. Not exactly standard protocol for approaching potential threats. But Nezu's instincts were usually correct. "He thinks you might need help," Aizawa said, which was true if incomplete. "You're not from around here. That obvious? You appeared 3 days ago in the middle of a restricted training area." "Yes, it's obvious." The man scratched his head, a gesture so casual, it almost made Aizawa forget he was talking to someone, Usaseja, who could fold steel with his bare hands. "I'm trying to find my way home. Ended up here by accident. Some kind of spatial thing, I think. Haven't figured it out yet. Spatial displacement. Dimensional travel. Teleportation." The technical term didn't matter as much as the implication this man wasn't native to their world, which would explain why he had no records, no registration, no quirk signature. It would also create an entire new category of problems that the Hero Commission would absolutely mishandle. "UA has resources," Aizawa said. "Research facilities, people who understand quirks and spatial phenomena. If you need help finding answers, that's the place to start." The man studied him for a long moment, and Aizawa had the distinct impression he was being evaluated according to criteria that had nothing to do with hero rankings or combat capability. Then the man shrugged. "Okay, that was easy. Suspiciously easy." Aizawa had expected more resistance, more questions, at least a token amount of paranoia about strangers offering help. But the man just stood there waiting like he'd already decided Aizawa wasn't a threat and had moved on to thinking about other things. "What's your name?" Aizawa asked. "Saitama." "Just Saitama?" "Yeah." They walked to UA in a relative silence, Saitama occasionally pausing to look at buildings or street signs with that same mild interest he'd shown the cabbage. Aizawa found himself studying the man's gait, his posture, the way he moved through the world. No combat stance, no situational awareness. Complete and utter relaxation, as if violence was so far outside his frame of reference that he'd stopped preparing for it entirely, which was either the mark of someone completely harmless or someone so far beyond danger that the concept had lost all meaning. Aizawa suspected it was the latter. UA's main building rose ahead, its modern architecture gleaming in the afternoon sun. Students moved between classes, their voices carrying across the campus in that particular blend of energy and anxiety that marked the hero course. Aizawa led Saitama through a side entrance, avoiding the main corridors. The last thing they needed was for someone to recognize the bald ghost and trigger a panic. Too late. Midoriya. Izuku rounded the corner at exactly the wrong moment. His arms full of notebooks, his attention focused on not dropping them. He collided with Saitama with enough force to send papers flying, stumbled back and looked up with an apology already forming on his lips. Then he saw who he'd run into. The notebooks hit the floor. Deku's eyes went wide, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. He took a step back, then another, his hand instinctively reaching for the quirk that had taken him years to control. One for All sparked green along his arm before he managed to suppress it, the energy dissipating into nothing. "Sorry," Saitama said, bending down to help gather the scattered notebooks. "Wasn't watching where I was going." Deku stared. Just stared. His brain was clearly trying to process multiple impossibilities. At once the bald ghost was here at UA, helping him pick up notebooks like this was a normal social interaction and not a moment of historic significance. His mouth worked soundlessly for another few seconds before he managed actual words. You're him, the ghost, the bald ghost. I mean, not that being bald is, I'm not trying to be rude about, I just meant..." Deku took a breath, forcing himself to slow down. "You saved those people, multiple times, without a quirk." Saitama looked at Aizawa. "Do people here only save people if they have quirks?" "It's complicated," Aizawa said, which was the understatement of the century. "Why?" Saitama handed Deku the last of his notebooks. "Someone's in trouble, you help them. Doesn't seem complicated." Deku took the notebooks with trembling hands, and Aizawa recognized that expression. It was the look of someone having their foundational assumptions challenged, the look of a worldview cracking open to let in new light. This was the student who'd spent his entire childhood being told he couldn't be a hero because he was quirkless, who'd internalized that message so deeply it had become part of his identity. And now here was someone who apparently hadn't received that message, or had received it and ignored it completely. "How did you get so strong?" Deku asked the question, coming out barely above a whisper. "If you don't have a quirk, how did you..." He gestured vaguely, encompassing all the impossible things Saitama had done. Saitama considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Training, I guess. Worked hard at it." "What kind of training?" "Regular stuff. Exercise, push-ups, running." Deku's analytical mind was clearly trying to make sense of that answer, to fit it into some framework that would explain superhuman capability through conventional methods. The exercise part made sense. Professional heroes trained constantly. But there had to be more. Some secret technique, some hidden method, some key he was missing. "That's it, just exercise?" "Pretty much." The silence stretched. Deku looked at Aizawa, hoping for clarification, or context, or anything that would help this make sense. Aizawa just shrugged. He was as lost as the kid. "But that's..." Deku stopped himself, visibly choosing his words. "Everyone trains. Every hero trains. Some people train their entire lives and never reach the level you're at. There has to be something else. Some secret or technique or..." "There's no secret," Saitama said. His voice was gentle, lacking the frustration that might have accompanied such a statement. He wasn't being evasive or mysterious. He was just stating a simple fact. I decided I wanted to be strong enough to help people, so I trained until I was. But the limits, Deku said. Human limits, biological constraints, physics. You can't just ignore. Why not? The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Aizawa felt something shift in the atmosphere, some fundamental assumption being dragged out into the light where it could be examined. Why not? As if limits were suggestions rather than laws. As if capability was determined by decision rather than biology. Deku opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. His entire framework for understanding the world, Quirk's genetics inherited power, was colliding with an alternative that shouldn't work, but apparently did. I need to... Deku gestured vaguely toward the classroom wing. I'm late for class. But could I talk to you again? Later I have so many questions. Sure, Saitama said. Deku grabbed his notebooks and ran his movements automatic, his mind clearly elsewhere. Aizawa watched him go, then turned back to Saitama. You just broke that kid's understanding of reality. Was it wrong? No, Aizawa admitted. That's the problem. They continued to Nezu's office, passing students who hadn't yet made the connection between the plain bald man and the viral legend. But word would spread. It always did at UA. By evening, the entire school would know the bald ghost was here. The questions would multiply. The theories would grow increasingly wild. The pressure for answers would become overwhelming. And at the center of it all, completely unbothered by the chaos he'd created, would be a man who just wanted to find his way home. Aizawa knocked on Nezu's door, announced their arrival, and stepped aside to let Saitama enter first. The principal sat behind his desk, teacup in hand, eyes bright with curiosity. He gestured to a chair oversized to accommodate various body types and smiled. Thank you for coming, Mr. Saitama. I've been very eager to meet you. Saitama sat down, the chair creaking under his weight. The hero guy said you might be able to help me get home. Perhaps, Nezu said. But first I'm hoping you can help me understand something. You see, I've reviewed the footage of your activities quite carefully, and I find myself facing a rather significant puzzle. He set down his teacup. You're quirkless. Our analysis confirms it. No genetic markers, no energy signature, no biological enhancement, and yet you perform feats that should be physically impossible for any baseline human. So my question is quite simple. Nezu leaned forward, his expression one of genuine fascination. How do you exist? Saitama thought about it. Then he shrugged. I just do. And somehow, impossibly, that was the most honest answer anyone had given in this building all day. All Might stood in Training Ground Alpha, trying to remember the last time he'd felt genuinely nervous. It had been years. Decades, perhaps. Not since his early days as a hero, when every fight carried the real possibility of failure, when he was still learning the limits of one for all, and discovering that those limits were far beyond anything he'd imagined. But he'd grown into the power, mastered it, become something more than human, something symbolic, something that didn't get nervous before simple demonstrations. Except this wasn't simple. And the man standing across from him, hands in his pockets, looking vaguely bored, was apparently something that defied categorization entirely. Thank you for agreeing to this. All Might said, his voice carrying that practiced boom of confidence, even as uncertainty gnawed at him. I want to be clear, this isn't an interrogation. We're not trying to contain you or study you like some specimen. We just need to understand. Saitama shrugged. Nezu explained. You want to see what I can do? That's fine. Around the perimeter of the training ground, UA's faculty had gathered. Aizawa leaned against the observation booth's window, his expression carefully neutral. Present Mike had his recording equipment ready under strict orders to keep the footage classified. Midnight Power, Loader, Cementos, Ectoplasm, they'd all found reasons to be present for this. Even Principal Nezu had descended from his office, perched on a specially designed platform with a clear view of the arena. And in the student observation area, despite this being technically a closed exercise, several members of Class 1A had managed to find their way in. Deku sat front and center, 3 notebooks open in his lap pen, moving in rapid strokes. Beside him, Bakugu radiated barely contained aggression, his jaw clenched tight. Todoroki Uraraka Kirishima and half a dozen others filled the remaining seats, all wearing the same expression of intense focus. All Might took a breath and let his weakened form fade. Muscle mass expanded, height increased. The symbol of peace emerged. Golden hair defying gravity, smile blazing with confidence he didn't quite feel. The transformation always felt like putting on armor, not just physical enhancement, but a role, a performance, a promise to everyone watching that everything would be okay. He wondered if that promise was about to be broken. "We'll start small," All Might announced, addressing both Saitama and the observers. "Work our way up. Give us a baseline to understand." "Ready." Saitama nodded, his posture unchanged. Still relaxed. Still casual. Like he was waiting for a bus, rather than about to be hit by the world's strongest hero. All Might pulled back his fist, channeling roughly 10% of One for All's power. Enough to shatter concrete. Enough to knock out most villains in a single blow. Enough to at least make someone without a defensive quirk flinch. He threw the punch. Texas smashed the wind pressure alone, creating a visible shockwave that tore across the training ground. The air itself seemed to compress and expand, a wall of force traveling at supersonic speed directly toward Saitama's chest. It hit. The shockwave dispersed around Saitama like water around a stone, the force simply flowing past him without effect. He didn't move, didn't brace, didn't react at all beyond blinking once slowly, as if the attack had been a mild breeze rather than something capable of demolishing buildings. All Might straightened, recalibrating. "Did you feel that?" "Yeah," Saitama said. "Was that it?" The observation area erupted in whispers. All Might raised his hand for silence, and the students complied immediately, though the shock on their faces remained visible. He'd hit people with 10% before. They went down. They stayed down. This man had absorbed it without even shifting his weight. "No," All Might said. "That was the warm-up." He pulled back again, this time channeling 30%. The air around his fist began to shimmer with heat and pressure. This was the level he used for serious villain encounters, the kind of force that could stop charging Nomas and break through reinforced barriers. He aimed carefully, not directly at Saitama, but at the space just in front of him, planning to gauge the defensive response. Detroit smash. The impact created a crater where All Might's fist passed through empty air. The shockwave rolled outward in a visible ring, dust and debris scattering in all directions. The training ground's reinforced walls cracked. Several observation windows fractured despite their enhanced construction. Saitama raised one hand palm out, catching the shockwave like someone stopping a door from closing. The force dispersed around his hand, redirected upward, where it dissipated harmlessly into the sky. He lowered his hand slowly, examining his palm as if checking for damage. "That one I felt," he said. "You're pretty strong." In the observation booth, Aizawa straightened. Beside him, Midnight had gone pale. Present Mike's recording equipment nearly slipped from his hands. This wasn't just resistance to damage, this was complete negation of force at a level that should have required a specialized defensive quirk. Multiple specialized defensive quirks. All Might felt sweat beginning to form on his brow, not from exertion, from the dawning realization that he might need to go beyond demonstration levels, might need to tap into percentages he reserved for life or death situations just to get an adequate baseline measurement. "Are you all right to continue?" All Might asked. "Sure," Saitama said. "You can go harder if you want. I won't break. Something about that statement, the casual confidence, the complete absence of bravado, sent a chill down All Might's spine. This wasn't posturing. It was just fact delivered with the same tone someone might use to comment on the weather. He glanced at Nezu. The principal nodded slowly. Permission and encouragement combined in that single gesture. Whatever they discovered here, it needed to be discovered under controlled circumstances rather than in the field. All Might channeled 50%. The ground beneath his feet cracked from the pressure of power flowing through his body. His muscles tensed one for all, burning through his cells like lightning through wire. This was the threshold where the difference between hero and symbol became apparent. This was the level that made villains reconsider their life choices. United States of Smash. The words came out as a battle cry, muscle memory, and showmanship combining with genuine effort. His fist shot forward, not aiming to hit Saitama directly, but to pass close enough that the sheer wind pressure would demonstrate the gap in their capabilities. The explosion of air pressure flattened everything in a 40-meter cone. Training equipment disintegrated. The ground was carved into a channel half a meter deep. The shockwave hit the far wall with enough force to activate emergency stabilizers, and for a moment, All Might wondered if they'd need to evacuate the building. Then the smoke cleared. Saitama stood in the exact same position, completely unmoved. His cape fluttered in the residual wind, settling back against his shoulders as the air calmed. He had one hand raised, not defensively, just casually, shielding his eyes from the dust. "Your cape's really dramatic," Saitama observed. "Does it come with the transformation?" All Might stared. 50%. 50% of one for all the power that had been cultivated and passed down through 8 generations. The accumulated strength of Japan's greatest heroes had just been casually ignored by a man commenting on fashion choices. In the student area, Deku's pen had stopped moving. His mouth hung open, analytical mind clearly racing through calculations that refused to produce coherent results. Beside him, Bakugu had gone silent, his typical aggression replaced by something that might have been awe or might have been existential crisis. "One more," All Might said, his voice steady despite the growing surrealism of the situation. "I'm going to put real power into this one. But I'll aim to the side, let you feel the pressure without direct contact. If it's too much, say something." "Okay," Saitama said. All Might took a stance he rarely used outside of world-threatening emergencies. Legs braced, full power channeled. 100% of one for all, the complete, unleashed potential of the world's strongest hero. The air around him began to distort, not from heat, but from the sheer density of power radiating outward. Small stones lifted off the ground, suspended in the pressure field. He aimed 20 degrees to Saitama's left. Close enough to demonstrate, far enough to avoid direct impact. Close enough that the pressure alone would test any defensive capability. United States of Smash. The punch didn't just displace air. It temporarily created a vacuum. A corridor of nothing that the world rushed to fill with a sound like thunder split and multiplied. The training ground's entire left side simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. The wall was gone. The equipment was gone. The ground had been excavated down to bedrock. When the pressure wave reached the student observation area, reinforced as it was, it still cracked 3 windows and knocked half the students out of their seats. All Might held the pose, chest heaving, smoke rising from his costume. That had been everything. Every bit of one for all. He could safely manifest without causing permanent damage to his deteriorating body. That had been the symbol of peace at full strength, the power that had maintained world order for decades. And through it all, standing just outside the destruction's edge, Saitama had remained perfectly still. His cape had blown backward. His hair, what little there was, had been pushed flat against his head. But he hadn't moved, hadn't braced, hadn't done anything except stand there and experience the full pressure of the world's mightiest hero's ultimate attack. Slowly, Saitama's cape settled back into place. He looked at the massive crater where the wall used to be, then at All Might, then back at the crater. "That was really impressive," he said, and he sounded genuinely appreciative. "You must have trained a lot." All Might felt his transformation wavering. Not from exhaustion, though he'd pushed hard, but from the sheer cognitive dissonance of the situation. He'd just demonstrated the peak of what quirk-enhanced humanity could achieve. He'd shown the power that made him the symbol of peace, the deterrent that kept villains worldwide in check. And this man was complimenting his work ethic. The transformation faded. All Might returned to his weakened form, gasping slightly, one hand pressed to his side, where old injuries made themselves known. He looked at Saitama, really looked at him, trying to find something, anything that would explain this. "How?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "How are you this strong?" Saitama scratched his head, the gesture now familiar from observation footage. "I just trained. Did exercise every day. Push-ups, sit-ups, running, nothing special." "That's not..." All Might stopped himself. The denial was automatic, built on decades of understanding how power worked in this world. But what if that understanding was incomplete? What if there were other paths, other possibilities, other ways of achieving strength that didn't rely on genetic lottery or inherited gifts? He thought about young Midoriya watching from the observation area, the boy who'd been told his entire childhood that he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. The boy who'd received One for All because All Might had seen something in him worth cultivating. And here was someone who'd apparently become strong enough to make One for All look pedestrian through sheer determination and conventional exercise, if it was possible. If this wasn't a quirk or mutation, but genuine, achievable human potential, then what did that mean for hero society? For the entire system built on the assumption that power came from genetics. In the student observation area, Bakugo finally found his voice. "There's no way." The shout echoed across the training ground. "You're hiding something. You have to be. There's no way some bald nobody without a quirk can just..." "Bakugo." Aizawa's voice cut through the rant like a blade. "Sit down." But Bakugo was already moving, vaulting the observation railing explosions, propelling him toward the arena floor. He landed hard, knee-bent fists crackling with nitroglycerin sweat. His eyes were wild, not with rage, but with something deeper. Desperation, maybe, or fear that his entire worldview was crumbling. "Fight me," Bakugo demanded. "Right now. I'll show everyone you're not that special, that quirks still matter, that..." Saitama turned to face him. And something in that movement, the casual attention, the complete lack of concern, made Bakugo's explosion sputter and die. "I'm not here to fight students," Saitama said gently. "You seem upset. Are you okay?" The question, asked with genuine concern, seemed to deflate Bakugo more effectively than any counterattack. He stood there, fists clenched, but inactive, trembling slightly. Deku appeared at the arena entrance, having run down the stairs without thinking. "Kachan, don't..." He stopped seeing the frozen tableau. Bakugo standing down, Saitama waiting patiently, All Might in his weakened form looking contemplative. "I need to ask you something," Deku said, addressing Saitama directly. His voice was steadier now, analysis mode giving him focus. "You said you just trained. Regular exercise, but everyone trains. Heroes train their entire lives. What made your training different?" Saitama considered the question seriously. "I guess I didn't stop when it got hard. Didn't think about limits, just kept going." "But biological limits are real," Deku pressed. "Muscle tissue has maximum density. Bone structure has stress thresholds. The human body has physical constraints that..." "Why?" The question stopped Deku cold. He blinked. Why does it have those limits?" Saitama asked. "I mean, I know biology says there are limits, but biology also said humans couldn't fly right." Then someone got a flying quirk. Maybe limits are just what we accept until we don't. Silence fell over the training ground. It wasn't a scientific argument. It wasn't even a particularly sophisticated philosophical stance. But something about the simplicity of it, the refusal to accept boundaries as permanent, resonated in a way that careful analysis couldn't. All Might straightened the pain in his side, forgotten. He looked at Saitama with new understanding. You're not stronger because of genetics or heritage. You're stronger because you decided you would be. I guess, Saitama said. I wanted to be strong enough to help people, so I worked until I was. Nezu's voice came through the intercom, calm and measured. Mr. Saitama, I believe we have our baseline. Thank you for your patience with this demonstration. I think we all have a great deal to process. Sure, Saitama said. Can I go now? I'm kinda hungry. All Might found himself laughing, a real laugh, not the practiced boom of the cymbal, but genuine, surprised amusement. Here was someone who'd just tanked the full power of One for All, and his main concern was lunch. It was so absurd, so completely divorced from the weight everyone else was placing on this moment, that it somehow circled back to being perfect. Yes, All Might said. You can go, but Saitama. He waited for the man to turn back. What you've shown us today, it changes things. Not just for heroes, but for everyone who's ever been told they can achieve something. Saitama shrugged. People can do more than they think. Just takes work. He walked toward the exit, passing Deku and Bakugo without ceremony. Both students watched him go, wearing similar expressions of profound confusion. Behind them, the faculty began filing out their conversations, already starting theories being formed, and discarded the implications, spreading like ripples through still water. All Might looked at the massive crater his final punch had created, then at the spot where Saitama had stood completely unaffected. A man without a quirk had just proven that the entire Hero Society's understanding of power was incomplete. And somewhere in this building, that truth was going to start changing things, whether they were ready or not. The footage leaked 72 hours after the test. Not the official recording that remained locked in UA's secure servers, accessible only to faculty with special clearance. But someone had filmed through one of the observation windows with a phone, the angle awkward and the quality poor, but clear enough to show what mattered. A man in a yellow suit standing motionless while All Might's attacks tore the world apart around him. The video hit the internet at 3 a.m. By sunrise, it had been viewed 40 million times. Hero Commission headquarters became a fortress of crisis management within hours. Conference rooms filled with analysts and PR specialists, all attempting to control a narrative that had already escaped containment. The chairman, a severe man named Kensuke Tanaka, stood at the head of the main briefing room, his expression carved from stone. "We need to contain this individual," he said, not for the first time. The longer he remains unsupervised, the greater the risk to public order. A quirkless individual with this level of capability fundamentally undermines everything we've built. His deputy, a woman with a mind-reading quirk that made her thoughts visible, as floating text above her head, shook her head. The text read, "This isn't about risk, it's about control." With respect, Sir Yue's assessment suggests no hostile intent. Every action he's taken has been protective or neutral. Intent can change, Tanaka said. Power without accountability is a threat regardless of current behavior. We need him registered, monitored, and if necessary, contained. The discussion continued. Voices rising, positions hardening. But the real problem wasn't in the conference room. It was spreading across every communication network in Japan, a conversation too large and decentralized to control. On the streets of Musutafu, the debate had already divided into camps. A coffee shop in the business district had become an impromptu gathering place for the skeptics. They huddled over laptops and tablets, dissecting the footage frame by frame, searching for evidence of trick photography or hidden quirk usage. It had to be fake. Had to be. Because if it wasn't, then everything they understood about human potential and heroic capability was wrong. "Look at the compression artifacts here," a young man said, pointing at his screen. "The resolution drops exactly when the impact should occur. That's editing. Multiple sources, someone else countered. You can't fake multiple angles with identical timestamps. This happened. Then he has a quirk. Has to. Maybe something that nullifies other quirks, makes him immune." That would explain. Analysis came back negative. No quirk factor. No genetic markers. Then the analysis is wrong. The circular logic continued, each person clinging to their framework of understanding, because the alternative was too destabilizing to accept. 3 blocks away, in a community center gymnasium, a different crowd had gathered. These were the quirkless, the 5% of the population that hero society had left behind. They watched the footage not with skepticism, but with something approaching reverence. An elderly man, weathered and tired, played the video for the 100th time. "My grandson asked me yesterday if I was disappointed that he didn't manifest a quirk. He's 7 years old and already apologizing for what he is. My daughter's school counselor suggested specialized education," a woman said quietly. "Code for she won't amount to anything. She's 12, straight A's, but they've already written her off." "This changes things," someone else said, gesturing at the screen where Saitama stood unmoved against All Might's assault. "This proves we're not limited. We're not lesser. We just have to work harder." "Or it proves he's a freak," another voice called out. "One exception doesn't change the rule. How many quirkless people can do what he does? How many of us will ever be that strong?" "Doesn't matter," the elderly man said. "It matters that someone is. It matters that it's possible." That's enough. The divide grew deeper with each passing hour. News networks picked up the story, each putting their spin on the narrative. Conservative outlets called for immediate action, framing Saitama as a potential threat that needed to be secured before tragedy struck. Progressive channels celebrated him as proof that the quirk-based hierarchy was artificial, that heroism wasn't genetically determined. Social media became a battleground of competing ideologies. Every opinion amplified, every nuance lost. UA High School tried to maintain normalcy, but the attempt was futile. Students gathered in clusters during breaks, arguing, theorizing, processing. Class 1A had become the epicenter of speculation. They'd been there, had witnessed the test firsthand. Their accounts varied depending on who was telling the story, but certain details remained consistent. Deku spent his lunch period alone in the library, surrounded by books on physics, biology, and quirk theory. None of them provided answers. The equations broke down. The biological models failed. Everything he'd studied, everything he'd based his understanding on, seemed suddenly inadequate. His notebook lay open to a fresh page. At the top, he'd written a single question: if limits are just accepted boundaries, how do we stop accepting them? Below that, pages of failed attempts at answering. Crossed out theories, abandoned calculations. The scientific method colliding with something that refused to be categorized. "You're overthinking it." Deku looked up to find All Might standing nearby, his weakened form looking particularly fragile in the library's harsh fluorescent lighting. The symbol of peace had aged visibly in the past few days, or perhaps Deku was just noticing it for the first time. "How can I not overthink it?" Deku asked. "Everything I believed about how strength works, about how heroes are made, he just ignored all of it and succeeded anyway." All Might sat down across from him, moving carefully like someone aware of their body's limitations. "I've been thinking about that. About what I said when I first met you. That you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. You gave me one for all," Deku said quickly. You made it possible. I made it easier, All Might interrupted. But watching Saitama, I wonder if it was actually necessary, or if I just couldn't imagine another path. He looked at his hands, thin and weak, the hands that had once held the world's greatest power. We built a society on the assumption that quirks define capability. And maybe that's been limiting us all along. Before Deku could respond, Uraraka appeared at the library entrance, her expression urgent. Deku, you need to come. Hero Commission people are at the school. They're trying to take him. The confrontation was already underway when Deku and All Might arrived at the main building. 3 commission agents in dark suits stood in the entrance hall facing Principal Nezu and Aizawa. Behind them, through the glass doors, several police vehicles waited. This isn't a negotiation, the lead agent was saying. The individual known as Saitama is to be remanded to commission custody for assessment and registration. UA's cooperation is expected, and if we decline, Nezu asked pleasantly, his tone completely at odds with the tension in the air, then UA is in violation of national security protocols. We'll obtain a warrant and return with appropriate force. Interesting, Nezu said, because I've reviewed those protocols rather carefully. They apply to quirk-based threats and villain activity. Saitama has done neither. He's committed no crime, threatened no one, and by all legal definitions is a civilian who's helped prevent property damage and saved lives on multiple occasions. The agent's jaw tightened. He's an unknown variable with capabilities that exceed the top heroes. That alone makes him powerful, Nezu interrupted. Not criminal. Japan is still a nation of laws, last I checked. Or are we now detaining people for the crime of being strong? The standoff continued, voices rising, legal citations being thrown back and forth like weapons. Deku watched from the side, his mind racing. This was what Saitama had avoided by not seeking attention, by just wanting to go home. But now that the world knew about him, it couldn't tolerate not controlling him. Movement in his peripheral vision. A figure in the shadows near the student dormitories, watching the scene with predatory focus. Deku's heart jumped. He knew that Silhouette had seen it in person only once, but remembered it perfectly. Stain, the hero killer, shouldn't be here. He was wanted in 3 prefectures, had killed 4 heroes, and injured 7 more. He was dangerous, unstable, a threat to everything Hero Society represented. And he was standing 50 meters away, making no attempt to hide beyond casual shadow. Deku's hand moved toward his phone, ready to alert someone when Stain's eyes met his. The hero killer raised one finger to his lips, a gesture asking for silence. Then he pointed at Deku, then at a spot behind the dormitories. A request for a meeting. Every instinct Deku had screamed at him to refuse to call for help, to not engage with a known serial killer. But something in Stain's expression gave him pause. Not murderous intent, not aggression. Something almost like respect. Deku found himself walking toward the meeting point, his hand ready to activate One for All at any moment. This was stupid. This was dangerous. This was possibly the worst decision he'd made since the entrance exam. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Stain knew something important, something related to Saitama. The space behind the dormitories was shadowed, hidden from direct view. Stain waited there, leaning against the wall, like he had all the time in the world. Up close, he looked worse than the photos suggested, gaunt, scarred eyes burning with barely contained fervor. "Hero killer," Deku said, keeping his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "Midoriya Izuku," Stain replied. "Future symbol of peace if the rumors are true. One for All's new inheritor." Deku's blood ran cold. How did he? "I make it my business to know things," Stain continued. "To watch, to judge. That's my role in this broken system." He pulled out a knife, and Deku tensed, but Stain just began cleaning dirt from under his fingernails with the blade's tip. "I've been watching your bald ghost." He's not mine, and he's not a ghost. No, Stain agreed. He's something much more interesting. He's proof. Proof of what? That the system is built on lies. Stain's voice carried conviction that bordered on religious fervor. Hero society tells the quirkless they're worthless. Tells them they can't be heroes, can't be strong, can't matter. And most accept that. They believe the lie because everyone believes it. But then this man appears and he's everything they were told was impossible. Footsteps behind Deku. He turned to find Aizawa approaching his capture weapon, already loose and ready. The pro-hero's eyes were locked on Stain, calculating angles and distances. "Don't move," Aizawa said. Stain smiled. "Eraserhead, the hero who actually works instead of posing for cameras. I considered sparing you when the time came." "How generous," Aizawa said flatly. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of murder." "Am I?" Stain didn't move, didn't prepare for combat, just stood there with that knife in his hand. "Then make your move. But first ask yourself, do you really want to stop this conversation? Because I'm going to say something you both need to hear." Aizawa hesitated, and Stain took that as permission to continue. "I've killed false heroes," Stain said. "People who wear the title without earning it. Who profit from others' suffering. Who forget that heroism is about sacrifice, not celebrity. I've been trying to purge the rot from this system, one false hero at a time." He gestured toward the main building where the commission agents were still arguing with Nezu. "And then I see that man, Saitama. He saves people because they need saving, asks nothing in return, doesn't pose, doesn't preach, doesn't seek glory, just does what needs doing and walks away." "So you approve of him," Deku said carefully. "I have seen two real heroes in my life," Stain said. All might before fame corrupted the purity of his purpose, and now him. Two people in this entire rotten society who understand what it actually means to be a hero. His voice dropped lower, intensity building. And watching him, I realized something. The system isn't just corrupt. It's wrong at the foundation. It tells people they're born heroes or they're not. Born strong or weak. Born to matter or born to be ignored. And everyone accepts it because it's been true for so long. But it doesn't have to be, Aizawa said quietly. Stain's smile widened. Exactly. That man breaks the rule just by existing. And every second he's visible, more people start questioning. Start wondering if maybe they've been accepting limits that don't actually exist. He looked at Deku directly. You were quirkless once. You know what that means in this society. You know what you were told about your worth. Deku nodded slowly. So watch him, Stain said. Learn from him. Because he's going to change things whether he intends to or not. The only question is whether you'll help or hinder when it happens. Before either hero could respond, Stain moved. Not to attack, just backward, melting into the shadows with practiced ease. Aizawa's capture weapon lashed out, but found only empty air. The hero killer had vanished as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving only his words hanging in the space he'd occupied. Aizawa lowered his weapon slowly. Are you hurt? No, Deku said. He just wanted to talk. About Saitama, about what Saitama represents. The possibility that everything we think we know about heroism might be incomplete. They stood in silence for a moment, processing. From the main building, raised voices continued the commission agents, making threats, Nezu parrying with legal citations, the conflict escalating toward violence or resolution, impossible to tell which. For what it's worth, Aizawa said, Stain isn't entirely wrong. The system has problems, deep ones. We just disagree on the solution. He started walking back toward the building. Come on, this is going to get ugly, and you should probably be somewhere else when it does. Deku followed, but his mind remained on Stain's words. Two real heroes in the entire society, All Might and Saitama. One who'd built an empire on his power. One who just wanted to go home. Both in their own ways changing the world. And caught between them, a society that was slowly realizing its foundation might be built on sand. By evening, the confrontation at UA had made national news. The commission had retreated without Saitama, but they'd made their position clear. Cooperation was expected, compliance would be enforced. UA had countered with legal challenges and public statements about due process. The battle lines were drawn. Across Japan, people chose sides. The quirkless organized seeing in Saitama a symbol of possibility. The establishment pushed back, demanding order and accountability. Heroes debated in private, questioning assumptions they'd never examined before. And somewhere in the middle of it all, completely oblivious to the storm he'd created, Saitama sat in the UA cafeteria, eating dinner, and wondering if this world had sailed for the 37th time. The fracture doctor stood nearby, silent, and like all fractures once started, it would only spread. The room was dark except for the screen's glow casting harsh shadows across AFO's scarred face. Life support equipment hummed in the background, a constant reminder of mortality that he'd been defying for over a century. The video played in slow motion. Frame by frame, he watched Saitama stand unmoved as All Might's United States of Smash tore reality apart around him. AFO had experienced that punch firsthand back when both he and his brother's successor had been at their peaks. He knew exactly how much power was contained in that attack. Knew what it could do to the human body to steel to concrete, and this man had absorbed it like rain. Fascinating, AFO murmured, though the word carried no warmth. Terrifying, but mostly inconvenient. The doctor cleared his throat carefully. Should we consider him a potential asset if his power could be acquired? It can't. AFO's voice was flat, certain. I've stolen thousands of quirks, analyzed millions more. This isn't a quirk. There's no genetic marker to steal, no biological mechanism to replicate. He simply is. He paused the footage on Saitama's face, unremarkable, plain. The face of someone who could disappear into any crowd. That ordinariness was perhaps the most unsettling part. No mutation, no visible enhancement, nothing to suggest the incomprehensible power contained within. He's an error, AFO continued. A glitch in the system I've spent a century building, and errors must be corrected. The doctor hesitated. The reports say he's shown no hostile intent. Perhaps monitoring would be sufficient? You misunderstand. AFO turned his scarred face toward the doctor, and the man took an involuntary step back. His intent is irrelevant. His existence is the threat. Every day he remains visible, more people start questioning the natural order. The quirkless begin believing they can be more than what they are. The hierarchy destabilizes. The control I've cultivated begins to slip. He turned back to the screen, watching the frozen image of Saitama brushing dust from his glove. So casual, so unconcerned, as if he hadn't just survived an attack that could level cities. One for all was meant to be the pinnacle, AFO said quietly. The ultimate accumulation of power passed down and strengthened through generations. It was proof that true strength comes from legacy, from the quirk factor I helped create, from the system that makes heroes and villains possible. His hands clenched. And now here's a man who apparently achieved greater strength through exercise and determination. Do you understand what that means? The doctor nodded slowly. It undermines everything. It makes me obsolete. The admission came out like poison. 100 years of accumulating power, of building an empire on the fundamental truth that quirks define capability. And this bald fool in a cheap costume suggests that truth was always optional. AFO had built his dominance on a simple principle. Power was rare, genetic, and controllable. He controlled it by stealing quirks, by granting them strategically, by ensuring that strength flowed through channels he could manipulate. Heroes needed their quirks. Villains needed theirs. Everyone operated within a framework where AFO sat at the top of the food chain, the ultimate predator in an ecosystem he'd helped create. But Saitama existed outside that framework. Unpredictable, uncontrollable, unacceptable. "Bring me Tomura," AFO said. "It's time to accelerate the plan." The doctor bowed and left. AFO remained in the darkness, still watching that frozen image. In his long life, he'd faced countless threats. Heroes with justice burning in their eyes, rivals with power approaching his own. His brother, the first one-for-all user who'd opposed him with borrowed strength and unshakable conviction. But this was different. This wasn't opposition. This was obsolescence. This was the universe suggesting that everything he'd built, everything he'd become, might have been unnecessary all along. He wouldn't allow it. Couldn't allow it. The system was his masterpiece, and he would not watch it unravel because one man decided physics was negotiable. Tomura Shigaraki arrived an hour later, his steps heavy with anticipation. The young man had grown into his role. Anger channeled into purpose, destruction, given direction. But he was still incomplete. Still limited by the constraints of his current form. "Master," Tomura said, bowing slightly. His hands twitched, that familiar urge to touch, to decay, to destroy. "You called?" "I have a gift for you," AFO said. "And a target." He gestured and screens flickered to life around the room. Images of Saitama. Footage from multiple angles, multiple encounters. The zero pointer. The no-mu. The test at UA. Each one showing the same impossible result, casual, overwhelming strength that defied explanation. Tomura studied the screens, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion to something approaching rage. "Who is this? An anomaly," AFO said. "A man who should not exist according to every law that governs our world. He has no quirk, no enhancement, no explanation. And yet he possesses power that exceeds anything I've encountered in over a century." "Then we avoid him," Tomura said practically. "Focus on targets we can actually know." AFO's voice carried absolute authority. "We eliminate him, because as long as he exists, he proves that our entire system is built on a lie. That quirks aren't necessary, that power can be achieved through means I don't control. That everything I've built could be rendered meaningless by ordinary men deciding they won't accept their limitations." Tomura's hands clenched decay, spreading unconsciously across the armrest of his chair. "How do we kill something like that?" "We don't," AFO said. "Not directly. You do. After I've made you into something greater than you are." Over the following weeks, Tomura underwent a transformation that pushed the boundaries of even AFO's considerable expertise. The process was excruciating. Flesh torn apart and rebuilt quirk factors layered like sediment. The body forcibly evolved beyond its natural tolerances. AFO granted Tomura his most powerful quirks. Regeneration that bordered on immortality pulled from a villain who'd survived being blown apart multiple times. Enhanced strength that matched Prime All Might's baseline, stolen from a hero whose career AFO had ended decades ago. Sensory amplification that would let Tomura track targets across kilometers. Durability that could withstand tactical explosives. And most importantly, he enhanced decay itself. The original quirk had required touch, spreading slowly from contact point outward. But AFO modified it, splicing in aspects of other destruction-based abilities, amplifying its range and speed until it became something unprecedented. Now Tomura could activate waves of disintegration that would spread across entire city blocks, turning everything they touched to dust. The Hero Society believes in symbols, AFO explained as Tomura convulsed through another enhancement session. All Might is their symbol of peace. You will become the symbol of destruction. And when you've torn their world apart, When they're desperate and broken, then Saitama will intervene. And then Tamura gasped, his body smoking from the latest modification. Then we'll see if even his impossible strength can handle the full weight of evolved quirk power, concentrated into a single vessel. AFO placed a hand on Tamura's shoulder, feeling the new strength humming beneath. I've spent weeks analyzing his capabilities. He's strong, yes. Impossibly so. But he's also careless, casual. He doesn't take fights seriously because nothing has ever required it. So we make him take it seriously, Tamura said, understanding dawning. More than that. We create a situation where his strength becomes his weakness. Where the more power he uses, the more destruction he causes. Where saving people and fighting me become mutually exclusive choices. AFO smiled, though his scarred face made the expression grotesque. He's a hero after all. That's his fatal flaw. Heroes always choose to save people over winning fights. The transformation continued. Each day, Tamura grew stronger, faster, more durable. His decay evolved from a touch-based quirk to something that radiated outward, like a pulse spreading destruction in geometric patterns that consumed everything in their path. AFO fed him supplements stolen from various enhancement programs, pushed his body through training regimens that would have killed ordinary people, installed fail-safes and emergency protocols in case the quirk load became unstable. By the end of the 4th week, Tamura Shigaraki no longer existed. In his place stood Tamura Omega, a living weapon containing more raw destructive power than any single individual in Japan's history. FO stood before his creation, evaluating. The young man had grown taller, his frame bulked with enhanced musculature. His hands, once simply dangerous, now radiated an aura of disintegration that made the air shimmer. His eyes held a focus that had been absent before purpose refined to a razor's edge. "How do you feel?" AFO asked. Tamura flexed his fingers, watching decay dance across his skin without spreading beyond his control. Powerful. Complete. Ready. Good. AFO pulled up the tactical maps he'd been preparing. The attack will be multi-staged. First, Nomu strikes across Musutafu to draw out the professional heroes and scatter their forces. Second, you hit the Hero Commission directly. Cut off their coordination, eliminate their leadership. Third, activate decay across the downtown district. Make it impossible to ignore, impossible to contain with conventional hero work. And Saitama will come running. AFO's confidence was absolute. Heroes always do. And when he arrives, when he tries to stop you, you'll push him to use more power than he's ever needed before. In the middle of a populated city, surrounded by civilians, he'll be desperate to protect. His strength becomes a liability, and you exploit every hesitation, every moment he pulls his punches to avoid collateral damage. Tamura studied the maps, his tactical mind enhanced, along with everything else, already identifying key positions and fallback routes. And if he still wins, then we discover the limits of the impossible, AFO said. And I adjust my plans accordingly. But I don't believe he will. Because I've learned something in my century of existence: power without ruthlessness is just potential. And this Saitama, for all his strength, is hampered by the same weakness that's plagued heroes since my brother first opposed me. He cares, Tamura said. Exactly, he'll try to save everyone. Stop me without destroying the city. Protect the innocent while fighting a war. And those limitations, those self-imposed restrictions, are what will let you match him. AFO turned off the displays. The preparations are complete. The Nomu are ready. The locations are selected. All that remains is choosing when to begin. Tamura smiled, and it was an expression of pure malice. Soon, yes, AFO agreed. Soon we'll correct this error, restore the proper order. Prove that quirks are supreme, that the system I built is unshakable, that outliers like him are temporary aberrations to be eliminated and forgotten." He paused. "And if we fail, if somehow this bald fool proves even more impossible than the footage suggests, then at least we'll have pushed the system far enough that it won't matter. The chaos alone will take years to recover from." In his decades of planning, AFO had learned that victory came in many forms. Defeating Saitama directly would be ideal. But even failure would serve his purposes. It would destabilize hero society, eliminate leadership, scatter the populace, create the perfect conditions for his eventual rise. Either Tamura Omega would crush the anomaly and prove that evolved. Quirk power remained supreme, or Saitama would win, but lose everything he tried to protect in the process. Both outcomes serve the greater goal of proving that the old order, AFO's order, was the only viable path forward. "Go," AFO said to Tamura. "Prepare yourself. Meditate on what you're about to become. And when the moment comes, show this world what happens when they question the natural hierarchy." Tamura bowed and departed his enhanced footsteps, cracking the floor despite his careful control. AFO watched him go, then turned back to the frozen image of Saitama on the screen. That plain, unremarkable face, that casual posture, that absolute lack of concern. "You don't understand what you've disrupted," AFO murmured to the image. "Don't understand that systems exist for reasons, that hierarchies prevent chaos, that some truths must be protected even from evidence that they're false." He reached out and touched the screen, his fingers covering Saitama's face. "I've spent a century building this world, and I won't let one man tear it down simply by existing." The decision was made. The weapon was forged. The trap was set. All that remained was pulling the trigger and watching the world burn. The attack began at dawn. Most of Musutafu was still sleeping when the first Nomu materialized in Kamino Ward, its roar tearing through the early morning quiet like a knife through silk. Then another appeared 3 blocks away. Then 5 more scattered across the eastern district. Within minutes, dozens of bioengineered monsters were tearing through the city, each one stronger and faster than the previous generation. The Hero Network activated immediately emergency protocols, flooding communication channels. Pro-heroes scrambled from their agencies, some still pulling on costumes as they rushed toward the chaos. The response was professional, coordinated, exactly what years of training and preparation had designed them to do. It wasn't enough. These Nomu were different. Smarter, more aggressive. Where the older models had fought with animalistic predictability, these moved with tactical awareness, coordinating attacks, exploiting weaknesses, adapting to hero responses in real time. Endeavor arrived at the Kamino Ward incident to find 3 Nomu working in concert, one attacking from range with projectile quirks, while 2 others flanked, forcing him to divide his attention, burning through his flames faster than he could sustain. Hawks dove into the fray above downtown, his feathers cutting through the air with precision honed over years of hero work. A Nomu with enhanced speed caught him mid-flight, its claws tearing through his wing. He managed to escape, but barely crash landing on a rooftop with half his feathers gone and blood streaming from a dozen cuts. Mirko faced 2 Nomu simultaneously in the warehouse district, her kicks powerful enough to shatter concrete, but barely phasing creatures that regenerated damage almost as fast as she could inflict it. She was strong-skilled, relentless. But even she couldn't hold a position against enemies that simply wouldn't stay down. At UA, alarms shrieked through the dormitories. Students stumbled from their rooms, some still in pajamas, confusion giving way to alarm as they saw the smoke rising from multiple points across the city. Class 1A assembled in the common area, already moving toward their hero instincts despite lacking licenses. "We should help," Kirishima said, hardening his arms. "People are... We stay here," Aizawa interrupted, appearing in the doorway with his capture weapon already deployed. UA is on lockdown. No students leave campus, that's an order. But the heroes out there are getting overwhelmed, Deku protested. If we could just... You're not ready for this. Aizawa's voice carried absolute authority. These aren't training exercises. These are coordinated attacks by enemies who've been preparing specifically for maximum carnage. You go out there, you die. End of discussion. Before anyone could argue further, every screen in the building activated simultaneously. The image that appeared showed a figure standing atop what looked like Hero Commission headquarters, a young man with white hair, decay, spreading from his feet in visible waves. Tamura Omega. Heroes, he said, his voice amplified across every broadcast channel in Japan. You've built a society on the lie that quirks make you special. That power is inherited, controlled, distributed by those who claim authority. But power doesn't belong to systems. It belongs to those willing to take it. He spread his arms wide, and the decay beneath him pulsed outward like a living thing. The building began to disintegrate, not slowly, but in cascading waves that turned steel and concrete to dust in seconds. So I'm taking it, Tamura continued. All of it. And when I'm done, when your precious order has crumbled, we'll see what's left. We'll see who the real heroes are. The broadcast cut. But the damage was done. Across Japan, people understood this wasn't a normal villain attack. This was a declaration of war. At Hero Commission headquarters, the situation had already escalated beyond crisis. The building was evacuating heroes and staff, pouring out of exits as decay spread through the structure like cancer. But Tamura wasn't targeting the building. He was targeting the people. The commission chairman, Tanaka, tried to flee through the underground garage. He made it 3 steps before the decay caught his feet, spreading up his legs faster than he could scream. Others fell similarly. Analysts, coordinators, the infrastructure that kept Japan's hero network functioning. Within 10 minutes, the Hero Commission had effectively ceased to exist as a functional organization. Without central coordination, the hero response began to fragment. Individual heroes fought valiantly, but without strategy, without unified tactics. They were just powerful people, reacting to an overwhelming threat. The Nomu attacks weren't meant to be defeated. They were meant to scatter and exhaust the hero population, leaving them vulnerable for what came next. Tamura Omega appeared in downtown Musutafu with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested careful planning. One moment, the street was clear. The next, he stood in the middle of an intersection, his presence announced by the concrete beneath him turning to powder. Decay 2.0. He said to no one in particular, though cameras were already capturing the moment. Let me show you what evolution looks like. He placed his palm flat against the ground. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Decay spread outward in a perfect circle, accelerating as it moved, consuming everything in its path. Buildings didn't crumble, they simply ceased to exist, matter disintegrating atom by atom. Streets vanished. Vehicles disappeared mid-drive. The destruction spread like a shockwave, and nothing could stop it. People ran. Some made it. Many didn't. The disintegration was faster than fear, faster than reaction time. It was surgical, an absolute sphere of annihilation, expanding through the heart of Japan's most populous city. Emergency evacuation protocols activated. Heroes who'd been fighting Nomu suddenly shifted priorities, focusing on getting civilians clear of the expanding disaster zone. But the decay was faster than any evacuation. Blocks turned to nothing before heroes could even arrive. The city was being erased, and they were powerless to prevent it. Deku saw the footage from UA's command center, and something in him snapped. Orders didn't matter. Caution didn't matter. People were dying while he stood in safety, and he couldn't accept that. He activated One for All without thinking, green lightning crackling across his body as he burst through the nearest window. Midoriya, stop! Aizawa's capture weapon lashed out, but Deku was already gone, launching himself toward downtown with Black Whip anchoring him to building's float, letting him course-correct mid-air. Behind him, other students began moving Bakugo, blasting through walls, Todoroki creating ice pathways, Ida engaging Recipro Turbo. They reached downtown to find hell. The decay had carved a crater half a mile wide into the heart of Musutafu. At its center stood Tomura Omega, radiating power that made the air shimmer. Around the crater's edge, pro-heroes were making their last stand. Endeavor, his flames burning white with desperation. Hawks down to his last dozen feathers. Mirko bleeding from a dozen wounds but still fighting. Other heroes Deku recognized from rankings and news coverage, all pushing past their limits, all failing to slow Tomura's advance. Deku landed hard, his legs absorbing the impact through full cowling. He assessed the situation with the analytical speed that came from years of studying heroes. Tomura was the target. Stop him, and the decay stopped. Everything else was secondary. He charged forward, channeling One for All to its maximum safe output. Gear shift activated, accelerating his speed beyond what most could track. Fajin stored and released kinetic energy, amplifying his momentum. Danger sense screamed warnings that he ignored. He was fast enough, strong enough. He had to be. Tomura turned toward him, almost lazily. One for All's inheritor. How appropriate. Deku threw a punch with everything he had, 100% plus, gear shift's multiplication, plus Fajin's amplification. The force should have been enough to level a building. Should have been enough to match anything short of prime all might. Tomura caught his fist in one hand. The counterattack was almost contemptuous. A palm strike to Deku's chest, not even particularly fast, just efficient. The impact sent shockwaves through his entire body. Ribs cracked, organs compressed. He felt something tear inside, and then he was flying backward trajectory, completely uncontrolled body limp from shock. He hit the ground 100 meters away, bounced twice, and lay still. Black Whip twitched weakly, trying to activate defensive protocols his body could no longer execute. One for All flickered and died. His cells too damaged to maintain the enhancement. Through blurring vision, he saw other students arriving. Saw Bakugo unleashing his most powerful explosions. Saw Todoroki creating barriers of ice and fire. Saw them all trying desperately to do what he'd failed to accomplish. And he saw them all fall, not killed. Tomura seemed to be avoiding lethal force with the students, perhaps because AFO wanted them as examples rather than martyrs. But defeated. Absolutely comprehensively defeated. Bakugo's explosions barely scratched enhanced durability. Todoroki's temperature extremes were negated by quirk resistances. Ida's speed meant nothing against an opponent who didn't need to move fast to win. The professional heroes fared no better. Endeavor's prominence burn was dispersed by a shockwave. Hawk's aerial advantage meant nothing when Tomura could simply decay any surface he touched. Mirko's raw power bounced off regenerating flesh that healed faster than she could damage it. Tomura stood in the center of the battlefield, barely scratched, surrounded by the fallen. He looked almost disappointed. "This is what the symbol of peace built," he said. "This is Hero Society's defense pathetic." At UA, Aizawa watched the carnage through surveillance feeds, his jaw clenched so tight, his teeth hurt. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to help, to do something. But he was honest enough with himself to recognize that he'd be as useless as everyone else down there. His quirk erased one ability at a time. Tomura had dozens, and the enhanced strength alone would be enough to crush him. Beside him, Nezu stood perfectly still, his typical cheerfulness completely absent. "We need to evacuate," the principal said quietly. "UA isn't defensible against this." "Where do we evacuate to?" Aizawa asked. "He's destroying the city. Where's safe? Before Nezu could answer, Saitama appeared in the doorway. He'd been in the research wing, working with scientists trying to understand the dimensional rift that had brought him here. Now he looked at the screens, showing the devastation, his expression harder than Aizawa had ever seen it. That energy signature, Saitama said. The decay. It's similar to what brought me here. Dimensional instability. Nezu turned sharply. You're certain? Similar enough. Saitama was already moving toward the exit. I need to check it out. If there's a rift forming, if this is related to how I got here. That's the middle of a war zone, Aizawa said. I noticed. Saitama didn't slow down. But if there's even a small chance this is connected to getting home, I have to look. He was gone before anyone could stop him, moving faster than casual observation suggested he should be able to. Aizawa looked at Nezu, who was studying the screens with that calculating expression that meant he was thinking 10 steps ahead. Should we have stopped him? Aizawa asked. Could we have? Nezu replied. Then more thoughtfully, perhaps this is fortune. If anyone can survive approaching that disaster, it's him. You think he'll fight? I think, Nezu said slowly, that we're about to discover whether even impossible strength can change the outcome when the odds are this overwhelming. Downtown Tamura felt the shift before he saw it. The spatial distortion he'd been creating as a side effect of his enhanced decay was intensifying reality, bending in ways that suggested something was approaching. Something with enough mass or energy to create pressure waves through dimensional barriers. He smiled. AFO had predicted this. The anomaly would come to investigate. Would walk right into the trap without understanding what he was facing. The professionals' heroes were trying to regroup, dragging wounded toward evacuation points. Deku was being carried by Uraraka, his breathing shallow but steady. Bakugo was still conscious, but couldn't stand, his arms too damaged to create stable explosions. The students who'd survived were retreating, finally understanding that courage wasn't enough. And in the distance, walking toward the crater with his hands in his pockets, came a bald man in a yellow suit. He didn't rush, didn't fly, just walked like he was heading to the store rather than toward the most dangerous villain attack in Japan's history. Tamura's smile widened. Finally, the main event. Stain watched from a rooftop 2 kilometers away, far enough to observe without being caught in the destruction. He'd seen the heroes fall, seen the students try and fail, seen the symbol of Peace's inheritor crushed like an insect. And now he was watching Saitama approach the monster that had destroyed everything in his path. This is it, Stain murmured. This is where we learn if true heroism can survive in the modern world, or if even the purest will be consumed by the rot. Around him, Musutafu burned. The greatest concentration of heroes in Japan had been scattered, defeated, rendered irrelevant. The Hero Commission was destroyed. The infrastructure that maintained order had collapsed. And at the center of it all, a villain who'd transcended traditional limitations stood waiting for the one person who might be able to stop him. The sun was setting, painting the destruction in shades of orange and red. Smoke rose from 100 fires. The crater where downtown had existed was a monument to humanity's helplessness against overwhelming power. And into that hell walked a man who'd never lost a fight, facing an opponent specifically designed to exploit every assumption about how strength worked. The collapse was complete. What came next would determine not just who won, but whether hero society could survive at all. Or if AFO had been right all along, that systems existed for reasons, and those who challenged them deserved to be crushed. Endeavor knew he was going to die. The realization came with surprising clarity, cutting through the pain and exhaustion that had been building for the past hour. His flames were sputtering, his body operating on fumes and willpower. Every breath brought fresh agony from cracked ribs and internal damage. His vision swam at the edges, darkening in a way that suggested either shock or permanent damage. But people were still running, still screaming, still depending on heroes to buy them time to escape. So he stood. "Prominence burn," he growled, channeling what remained of his quirk into one more attack. The flames roared to life around him, white hot and desperate, consuming oxygen faster than he could safely sustain. He thrust both hands forward, and fire erupted in a column that would have reduced most buildings to slag. Tamura Omega stood in the flames and smiled. When the fire cleared, he was unmarked. Enhanced durability combined with regeneration meant Endeavor's ultimate attack had accomplished exactly nothing beyond exhausting the number 2 hero even further. Tamura took a single step forward, and Endeavor felt his legs buckle. Only pride kept him upright, pride in the knowledge that every second he lasted was another second for evacuation. "You're persistent," Tamura said. "I appreciate that. My master would have wanted to steal your quirk. But I'm not interested in collection, just elimination." He raised his hand, decay beginning to spread from his fingers. Endeavor tried to dodge, but his body wouldn't respond. Too slow, too damaged. This was how it ended, not in glory, but in simple biological limitation, a blur of movement. Hawks crashed into Endeavor from the side, tackling him clear of the decay wave. They hit the ground hard, rolling Hawk's remaining feathers forming a shield that barely held against the disintegration spreading around them. "Not today." Hawks gasped, his face pale from blood loss. Half his costume was shredded, his wings reduced to stumps. He shouldn't even be conscious, let alone moving. But heroes didn't get to choose when they stopped. They stopped when the job was done, and the job was nowhere near finished. Tamura turned toward them both, unhurried. Why rush when victory was inevitable? Then Mirko hit him from behind. She'd lost her mechanical arm somewhere in the earlier fighting. Blood matted her hair. One of her legs was clearly broken, bone visible through torn flesh. But she'd channeled everything into this one attack, all her remaining strength focused into a kick aimed at Tamura's spine. Luna Tijeras, her ultimate technique. The attack that had defeated dozens of high-level villains. Tamura stumbled forward half a step. Then he turned around and backhanded her across the battlefield. She flew 30 meters, hit a collapsed building, and didn't get up. Mirko, the hero known for never backing down from a fight, finally exceeded the limits of even her incredible durability. Endeavor watched her fall and felt something break inside that had nothing to do with physical damage. These were the best heroes Japan had produced. The fastest, the strongest, the most skilled. And they were being systematically destroyed by a single villain who wasn't even trying hard. Around the crater's perimeter, other heroes fought with the same desperate determination. Best Genist was using his last reserves to pull civilians clear of danger, his threads fraying from overuse. Edgeshot had collapsed his body too strained from prolonged high-speed combat. Mont Lady lay unconscious at her maximum size, having spent everything trying to physically block Tamura's advance. The professional heroes were done. That left only the students. Class 1A had regrouped at an evacuation point 3 blocks from the crater. They were battered, traumatized, some barely conscious. But they were also young enough to still believe that effort mattered, that trying was always worth it, that heroes didn't quit just because the situation was hopeless. "We need a plan," Yaoyorozu said, her voice shaking but determined. She'd been creating medical supplies non-stop for the past 20 minutes, her quirk pushing past safe limits. Something to slow him down. Buy more time. He caught Deku's full power with one hand. Todoroki said quietly. His left side was covered in frost, his right smoking with residual heat. What plan works against that? "We keep him focused on us," Kirishima said. He was hardened to his maximum cracks, visible in his crystalline skin from repeated impacts. "Keep him away from the evacuation routes. That's what heroes do. That's what dead heroes do." Bakugo snarled from where he sat against a wall, arms too damaged to create explosions. "This isn't heroic, it's suicide. We're not strong enough." Then we get stronger, Uraraka said. She was supporting Deku, who was conscious but barely able to stand. We find a way. That's what All Might would say. That's what... She looked at Deku, at his broken body and determined eyes. That's what heroes do. Deku tried to activate One for All. Green lightning flickered weakly around his arm before dying completely. His cells too damaged to maintain the enhancement. He'd pushed too hard, too fast, broken himself trying to match power he wasn't ready to handle. But he could still think, could still analyze, could still be a hero even if he couldn't be the strongest. Tamura's quirk works through contact or proximity, he said, each word costing him. We need ranged attacks, coordination. Make him defend instead of attack. Force him to use energy on protection rather than destruction. That's barely a plan, Bakugo said. It's better than nothing. Todoroki was already moving, creating an ice path toward the battlefield. Who's with me? They all were. Even injured, even terrified, even knowing it probably wouldn't matter. Because that's what UA had trained them, to be not the strongest, not the smartest, but the ones who stood when standing. Seemed pointless. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Todoroki's ice from the left, Bakugo's explosions from the right despite his damaged arms, Tokoyami's dark shadow from above. Yaoyorozu created flash grenades that Sero launched with tape blinding effects combined with Jiro's sonic attacks to overwhelm Tamura's senses. It worked for exactly 4 seconds. Tamura shattered the ice with a shockwave, caught Bakugo's explosions with a barrier of compressed air, swatted dark shadow aside like an annoying insect. The flash grenades and sonic attacks might have been effective against a normal villain, but enhanced senses meant Tamura adapted before the disorientation could take hold. He swept his hand across the battlefield, and decay spread in a wave. The students scattered, barely avoiding the disintegration, their formation breaking apart under pressure. Sero's tape dissolved mid-swing. Yaoyorozu's equipment turned to dust. The ground beneath them became unstable, forcing them to constantly move or risk falling into expanding gaps where matter simply ceased to exist. You're brave, Tamura said, and he actually sounded appreciative. Stupid but brave. That's admirable in its own way. But courage doesn't change the fundamental math. You're insects trying to fight a god. A new voice cut through the battlefield, weak but unmistakable. They're not fighting a god. They're fighting a spoiled child having a tantrum. All Might walked out of the smoke, his skeletal form looking particularly fragile against the backdrop of destruction. No costume. No transformation. Just Toshinori Yagi, the man who'd once been the world's strongest hero, now reduced to human limitations. Tamura's smile widened. The symbol of peace. How appropriate. Come to watch your legacy die. Come to remind you what heroism actually means. All Might's voice was steady, despite the pain clearly visible in every movement. You think power makes you special. That strength gives you the right to dictate terms. But real heroes don't fight because they're strong. They fight because people need them to. He stepped forward, putting himself between Tamura and the students. His body couldn't transform anymore, couldn't access One for All, could barely walk without pain. But he stood anyway, drawing a line in the rubble that said no further. That's pathetic, Tamura said. You can't even... All Might moved, not fast by hero standards, but fast enough. His fist, trained through decades of combat, even if it no longer carried supernatural force, caught Tamura across the jaw. The punch wouldn't have fazed a normal person. Against Tamura's enhanced durability, it was less than nothing. But it was something. It was an act of defiance. It was a statement that heroism transcended physical capability, that standing up mattered even when standing up was hopeless. Tamura grabbed All Might by the throat, lifting him off the ground. The former symbol of peace struggled weak hands, grasping at the arm that was choking him. His feet kicked uselessly. His face began to turn colors. "Stop!" Deku tried to move forward, his body refusing. "Please don't." "This is what happens to old symbols," Tamura said. "They become obsolete, irrelevant, dead weight holding back progress." He tightened his grip. "And obsolete things get discarded." Before he could finish the thought, before decay could spread from his hand, a blade pressed against his throat. Not deep enough to cut, but present enough to threaten. Stain stood behind Tamura, having approached with the silent speed that had made him one of Japan's most feared villains. His eyes burned with conviction that bordered on madness, and his voice carried absolute certainty. "Release him." Tamura's eyes flickered with surprise then amusement. "The hero killer. I've heard about you. Killing false heroes, trying to purify the system. We're not that different. We're nothing alike." Stain's blade didn't waver. "I kill those who've betrayed heroism's ideals. You kill because you can. There's a difference." "Then kill me," Tamura said. "I'm right here. Strike and prove your conviction." Stain's hand trembled. Not from fear, but from the terrible understanding that killing Tamura wouldn't stop the decay, wouldn't save the city, wouldn't accomplish anything beyond personal satisfaction. And personal satisfaction had never been his goal. He withdrew the blade and spoke instead, his voice carrying across the battlefield to where students huddled in fear and determination. "You're asking the wrong question. You're wondering if you're strong enough, brave enough, skilled enough to win. But heroism isn't about winning." He looked at Deku, at the broken boy still trying to stand. "It's about standing. Even when standing is all you can do, especially then." Tamura dropped All Might contemptuously. The older man hit the ground hard, gasping. Stain moved to his side, helping him sit up, checking his throat for crush damage. "You're dying," Stain said matter-of-factly. "Probably." All Might agreed, his voice rough. "But not yet. Not while kids are still in danger." Around them, the students were regrouping. They'd been beaten back, exhausted, broken. But Stain's words had rekindled something, not hope of victory, but understanding of purpose. They didn't need to defeat Tamura. They just needed to last long enough for evacuations to complete, for civilians to reach safety, for someone, anyone to arrive who could actually challenge this monster. So they stood. Todoroki created walls of ice that Tamura shattered. Tokoyami sent dark shadow in desperate strikes that accomplished nothing. Uraraka made rubble weightless and dropped it from above, forcing Tamura to defend. Kirishima charged directly, his hardened body absorbing decay, just long enough to throw a punch that Tamura barely felt. They were losing, had been losing, would continue losing until their bodies gave out entirely. But they were buying time, second by precious second. And in those seconds, hundreds of people were reaching safety. The sun was setting, painting the ruined city in shades of blood and shadow. Tamura stood in the center of devastation, barely scratched, surrounded by heroes who couldn't defeat him and students who couldn't stop him. Around him lay the evidence of hero society's failure. Broken defenders, shattered infrastructure, the symbol of peace reduced to a gasping figure in the rubble. He raised his hand for a final decay wave, one that would consume everything in a 2-kilometer radius. Enough to finish this. Enough to prove that even humanity's greatest efforts were meaningless against evolved power. "Any last words?" Tamura asked the battlefield at large. Deku, supported by Uraraka, managed to raise his head. His voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of everything he'd learned. Everything he'd fought for, everything. All Might had tried to teach him. Someone will stop you. Someone stronger, better prepared, more capable than us. We're just buying time for that someone to arrive. That's enough. That's what heroes do, Tamura laughed. And who is this mythical savior? Your symbol of peace can't even stand. Your strongest heroes are broken. Your backup is children and criminals. Who's left? The air pressure changed. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable against the chaos. But then the change intensified, wind picking up from a direction that made no meteorological sense, dust swirling in patterns that suggested something moving very fast from very far away. Stain straightened his eyes, widening. He'd been watching for this, hoping for this, the moment that would determine whether true heroism could survive in the modern world. He raised one hand, pointing toward the eastern sky. Him. Everyone turned. Even Tomura, for all his confidence, felt compelled to look. The setting sun created a silhouette against the orange sky, a figure moving toward them with steady, unhurried purpose. Walking, not flying, not rushing despite the urgency. Just approaching with the kind of casual certainty that suggested he knew exactly what he was walking into and wasn't particularly concerned. Saitama emerged from the smoke and shadow, his cape fluttering in the wind, his approach created. He'd been investigating the dimensional disturbance, trying to understand the energy signature that might lead him home. He'd felt the spatial warping intensify, had followed it to its source, and found this. He looked at the crater. The broken heroes, the terrified students, the man at the center who was clearly responsible for everything. His expression didn't change, no anger, no horror, no determination. Just that same mild interest he showed most things, as if this was mildly inconvenient rather than catastrophic. Tomura felt something he hadn't experienced since his transformation. Not fear that would be too strong, but uncertainty, calculation. The realization that for the first time since gaining these powers, he was facing a genuine unknown. You, Tomura said. The anomaly, the error in the system. That energy signature, Saitama replied, his tone conversational, despite the circumstances. The decay thing you're doing. It's warping space, making dimensional barriers unstable. You need to stop. I need to. Tomura's smile returned, confidence rebuilt through mockery. I don't need to do anything. I'm remaking this world. Starting by eliminating relics like... No, Saitama interrupted, and his voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Not anger, just finality. You're breaking things that don't belong to you. Hurting people who can't defend themselves. That's not remaking anything. That's just being a bully. He walked forward, hands still in his pockets, stepping over rubble without looking down. The casual approach was more unnerving than any combat stance, any battle cry, any display of power. I've been trying to get home, Saitama continued. Been here a few days, met some decent people, learned about this world's problems. And I was close to finding a way back. Your decay is generating the right kind of spatial distortion. I could use it to trace the dimensional path. He stopped 10 meters from Tomura, close enough that the decay aura radiating from the villain should have begun affecting him. It didn't. The disintegration field that had consumed buildings and bodies met Saitama's presence and simply stopped like water hitting stone. But looking at all this, Saitama gestured at the destruction, at the wounded heroes, at the city burning in the distance. I think finding my way home can wait a bit longer. Stain, watching from his position near, All Might felt tears in his eyes. This was it. The moment he'd been waiting for. Not just strength, but righteousness. Not just power, but purpose. The purest expression of heroism he'd seen since All Might's prime. Someone really does need to stop you, Saitama said to Tomura. His expression hardened, his posture shifting from casual to something else. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present in a way that made everything around him seem less substantial. So, I guess that's me. Tomura launched his strongest attack, Decay Wave, at maximum power, the technique that had carved through downtown Musutafo, the evolution of destruction that AFO had spent weeks perfecting. Saitama tilted his head slightly, watching the wave approach. Then he clapped. The shockwave from his hands meeting dispersed. The decay completely scattered its atomic structure, negated it so thoroughly that the technique simply ceased to exist. Not blocked, not defended against, just cancelled as if physics had briefly forgotten how disintegration worked. In the silence that followed with every hero and student watching, with Tamura's confidence finally cracking into genuine concern, Saitama spoke the words that would define what came next. Okay, now I'm actually kind of annoyed. And the true battle began. The silence was absolute, not the silence of peace, but the silence of held breath, of suspended disbelief, of the moment between lightning and thunder when the world waits to see how loud the impact will be. Every person on that battlefield, hero, student, villain, stood frozen, watching the man in the yellow suit walk through destruction like he was taking an evening stroll. Tamura's hand, raised to unleash another decay wave, remained motionless. For the first time since his transformation, he felt something he'd thought evolution had burned out of him. Not fear, not quite, but the primal recognition that predators feel when they encounter something higher on the food chain. Saitama stopped at the crater's edge and looked down at the destruction. The half-mile of nothing, where downtown Musutafu used to exist. The rubble, the smoke, the broken heroes scattered like discarded toys. His expression didn't change from that mild interest, that slight boredom that seemed to be his default state, but his eyes. For just a moment, his eyes carried something that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not rage, something colder. Disappointment, maybe. The look someone gives a child who should have known better. "This is what you did with all that power," Saitama said. It wasn't a question, just an observation delivered with the same tone he might use to comment on the weather. Destroyed a city. Hurt people who couldn't fight back. Made a mess. Tamura found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "I made a statement. Broke the old world so a new one could be built. You can't understand you're part of the system I'm destroying." "I'm not part of anything," Saitama replied. "I'm just visiting. Was going to leave as soon as I figured out how. But then you had to make all this noise with your decay thing. And now I can't track the dimensional signature through all the interference you're causing." He took another step forward onto the crater's edge, where decay still radiated in waves strong enough to disintegrate steel. The effect stopped at his shoes, unable to progress further, as if reality itself had decided that particular rule didn't apply to him. "So yeah," Saitama continued, "I'm annoyed. And when I'm annoyed, I tend to punch things that are annoying me. That's going to be you, by the way. Just so we're clear." Stain felt his legs weaken, not from injury, but from the sheer weight of what he was witnessing. This was it. This was what heroism looked like when stripped of pretense and politics and performance. No grand declarations, no dramatic poses. Just a man stating simple facts: "You did something wrong, so I'm going to stop you," delivered with the kind of casual certainty that came from never having failed before. All Might Samwich Stain said, his voice barely audible. The former symbol of peace sat nearby, still catching his breath from Tamura's chokehold. "You asked me once what I was fighting for, what I wanted hero society to become." All Might managed a nod. "That," Stain pointed at Saitama. "That's what I wanted. Not the power without purpose is just destruction, but the purity, the absolute absence of ego. He's not here for glory or recognition or to prove anything. He's here because someone needs to stop this, and he's capable of doing it. That's heroism in its truest form." Deku heard this from where Uraraka supported him and felt something click into place. All the analysis, all the studying, all the attempts to understand what made someone a hero, it had always circled around the same core truth that Stain was articulating now. The best heroes were the ones who showed up not because they wanted to, but because they needed to. Because no one else would. Because the alternative was letting innocent people suffer. Saitama embodied that principle so completely it hurt to look at him. Around the battlefield, heroes were struggling to their feet. Endeavor his flames completely extinguished now, using a broken piece of rebar as a crutch. Hawks dragging himself upright, despite everything screaming at him to stay down. The students battered and exhausted, finding strength in the shift they felt, but couldn't quite articulate. The air had changed. The oppressive weight of Tamura's power, the certainty that defeat was inevitable, had lifted. Not because anyone believed Saitama would definitely win. They'd learned enough in the past hour to know that certainty was a luxury. But because now, there was possibility. Now, there was a chance. Tamura felt that shift too, felt the narrative slipping away from him. AFO had warned about this, about how heroes drew strength from symbols from hope, from the belief that someone stronger was always coming to save them. The strategy had been to crush that hope so thoroughly that it could never recover. But how do you crush hope that walked through your strongest attack without noticing? You're making a mistake, Tamura said, trying to reclaim control through words since power seemed insufficient. My master spent weeks preparing me for you specifically. Enhanced durability, regeneration, quirks designed to counter impossible strength. You're not facing some amateur villain. You're facing evolution itself. Okay, Saitama said. Just that. Just okay. As if Tamura had mentioned he preferred tea over coffee, rather than threatening him with concentrated destructive capability that exceeded anything Japan had ever produced. The dismissiveness was more insulting than any comeback could have been. Tamura's control snapped. All the confidence, all the calculated calm, all the superiority AFO had drilled into him during the transformation process, it shattered against that single, infuriating word. He raised both hands and activated decay at maximum output. Not in a wave, but in a sphere expanding outward, in all directions, consuming earth and air and light itself. The technique was supposed to be unstoppable. AFO had tested it against every defensive quirk in his collection. Nothing survived. Nothing could survive the complete molecular disintegration of everything within a 100-meter radius. Saitama stood in the center of it, and when the decay cleared, he looked down at his gloves. One of them had a smudge on it. He brushed it off with his other hand, frowning slightly. That was kind of rude, he said. I was talking. The watching heroes felt reality tilt. They'd seen Saitama tank. All Might's attacks during the test had watched footage of him destroying Nomu with casual gestures. But seeing it in person, in the middle of a real battle against an attack that had erased city blocks like they were chalk drawings, that was different. That was proof. Not of impossibility, but of possibility. Proof that limits weren't laws, but suggestions. Proof that the frameworks they'd built their entire society around were incomplete at best, wrong at worst. Tamura took a step backward, then another. His tactical mind, enhanced along with everything else, was running calculations and finding no solution. No strategy, no combination of quirks that would bridge this gap. AFO had been wrong. The trap hadn't worked. The contingencies were worthless. This wasn't a fight he could win. This was an execution waiting to happen. Master, Tamura said, speaking to the communication link AFO had implanted in his ear. He's not. The reports didn't. We need to abort. FO's voice came back distorted by distance and interference. Continue the attack. Push him to his limits. Make him choose between fighting you and saving civilians. Force him to. He doesn't have limits. Tamura's voice cracked on the last word. You don't understand. It's not that he's strong. It's that strength doesn't apply to him the way it applies to everyone else. He's not in the game. He's not playing by the rules. He's something else entirely. Saitama took a step forward, and Tomura flinched. Actually flinched, his body reacting before his mind could override the instinct. That flinch, that single moment of visible fear from a villain who'd been untouchable moments ago, told everyone watching everything they needed to know. The scales had tipped. Stain stood up fully now, his injuries forgotten, transfixed by what he was seeing. This was the moment Hero Society would remember. Not Tomura's attack, not the devastation, not even the hero's brave stand. This moment when a man without a quirk walked into hell and made the devil step backward. The world changes now, Stain said to himself, tears streaming down his face. Everything changes. Because if he can exist, if someone like him is possible, then everything we thought we knew about human potential was wrong. And wrong things can be fixed. Deku felt it too, the shift in everything. He'd spent his whole life believing you needed a quirk to be a hero. Then All Might gave him one for all, and he'd believed you needed power. Then he'd seen Saitama, and now he was starting to understand that maybe heroism had never been about what you had. Maybe it had always been about what you chose to do with it. Saitama stopped 10 feet from Tomura, close enough that the villain could see his reflection in those plain brown eyes. Close enough to feel the complete absence of malice or excitement or fear. Just purpose. Just the simple decision to stop something wrong from continuing. "I'm going to hit you now," Saitama said with the same inflection he might use to announce he was going to the store. "Try not to destroy any more of the city when you land." Tomura's enhanced reflexes screamed warnings. His tactical mind ran through every defensive quirk, every evasion technique, every desperate strategy. His body moved before conscious thought, completed attempting to activate Warp Gate to create distance to do anything, except be where Saitama's fist was about to be. None of it mattered. Saitama's fist moved, and the world held its breath. The impact was coming. The resolution was coming. And every person on that battlefield, hero and student and criminal alike, knew they were about to witness something they'd spend the rest of their lives trying to explain to people who hadn't been there. The moment before the punch landed, stretched into eternity, crystallizing into memory. And then it fell. The punch connected with a sound that shouldn't have existed. Not the crack of impact or the boom of displaced air, but something deeper. A fundamental note that resonated through matter itself, as if reality was ringing like a struck bell. The force didn't explode outward in a shockwave. It traveled through Tomura's enhanced body with surgical precision, every ounce of kinetic energy contained and directed. For a fraction of a second, Tomura felt every defense activate simultaneously. Regeneration kicked in. Durability quirks hardened his cellular structure. Shock absorption attempted to disperse the force. Dozens of defensive mechanisms AFO had installed, all firing at once, trying desperately to mitigate what was happening. They failed. Tomura flew backward, not in a graceful arc, but in a straight line. His trajectory so fast he existed in multiple places at once from the watching hero's perspective. He hit the far side of the crater and kept going, punching through the rubble, through the foundation of what used to be a building, through 3 more structures, before momentum finally stopped him half a mile away. The impact crater where he landed was perfectly circular. Saitama lowered his fist and flexed his fingers, checking. No damage, not even sore. He'd pulled the punch significantly, maybe 10%, just enough to stop Tomura without killing him. Killing wasn't the point. Stopping was. Around the battlefield, silence reigned for another heartbeat. Then sound returned in a rush, debris settling fires, crackling someone's choked sob of relief or disbelief, or both. The students were staring, mouths open. The professional heroes looked like they'd witnessed something religious, something that transcended their understanding of physics and capability. Stain fell to his knees, and this time the tears came freely. "It's real," he whispered. "It's actually real. True heroism can win. Purity can overcome corruption. The world can be better. Endeavor found his voice first, though it came out rough. Did he? Is it over? No. Aizawa set his capture weapon ready despite knowing it would be useless. Look, in the distance where Tamura had landed, something was moving. The villain pulled himself from the rubble regeneration, already knitting broken bones and bones, healing ruptured organs, restoring damaged tissue. He stood shakily, one arm hanging at a wrong angle until it snapped back into place with an audible crack. But he stood. Impressive. Tamura said, his voice carrying across the crater despite the distance. That actually hurt. I didn't think anything could hurt anymore. He started walking back toward the battlefield, each step more confident than the last, as regeneration completed its work. But pain is temporary. Regeneration is permanent. My master designed me to outlast anything, to survive any attack through sheer attrition. You can hit me as hard as you want. I'll just keep getting back up. Saitama watched him approach, expression unchanged. That seems exhausting. It's evolution, Tamura replied. He was close enough now that they could see his face, not angry, not afraid, but focused with the kind of intensity that came from a plan crystallizing. And evolution always wins, because I don't need to defeat you. I just need to make you choose. He swept his hand across the crater, and decay spread again, not in a wave, but in branching paths like cracks in glass. Each branch split and split again, spreading faster than anyone could track, heading not toward Saitama, but toward the evacuation routes where civilians still fled. Stopping me or saving them, Tamura continued. You can't do both. Every second you spend fighting me is another second they're dying. And if you hit me too hard, the shockwave alone will collapse the remaining structures. Kill hundreds trying to kill me. So what's it going to be? Here are your ego or their lives. It was a perfect trap. The kind of no-win scenario that had broken lesser heroes countless times throughout history. AFO had designed it specifically for someone with overwhelming power. Turn their strength into a liability force, them to choose between victory and heroism, and watch them break, trying to do both. Saitama looked at the spreading decay. Then at Tamura. Then at the heroes watching from the crater's edge. Then back at Tamura. You think you're clever, Saitama said. Setting up this whole thing like it's a chess game. Make me choose between fighting you and saving people. But you're forgetting something. He started walking toward Tamura, casual and unhurried. Behind him, the decay paths were still spreading, still threatening to reach the evacuation routes. Any normal hero would be panicking now, trying to calculate impossible odds, attempting to split their attention between offense and defense. Saitama just kept walking. I'm not a chess piece, he said. I don't play by rules someone else made up. You want to force me to choose, fine. I choose to stop you first because once you're down, the decay stops. Problem solved. But the people will be fine. Saitama's pace didn't change. Because that's what heroes are for. The ones behind me, the ones you said were pathetic. They're not pathetic. They're just fighting something designed specifically to beat them. But me stopping you, that's what I'm designed for. So I'll do my job and they'll do theirs, and your whole plan falls apart because you assumed I'd think like you do. Tamura felt something crack in his tactical framework. The plan had been perfect. Force a choice. Exploit the enemy's heroism. Create a no-win scenario. But he'd built the trap, assuming Saitama would recognize it as a trap, would accept the forced choice as legitimate. Instead, Saitama had just refused to engage with the premise. Behind Saitama, the heroes were already moving. Todoroki creating ice barriers to slow the decay's spread. Uraraka making rubble weightless so others could move it faster. Deku, despite his injuries, coordinating evacuation routes through the chaos. They couldn't stop the decay, but they could buy time, could save lives even while the main battle continued. Tamura realized then what AFO had missed in all his planning. The trap worked on traditional heroes because traditional heroes were bound by the system. They followed rules, worked within frameworks, accepted the premises they were given. But Saitama wasn't a hero in that sense. He was just someone who hit things that needed hitting, and everyone else adapted around him, because that's what functional teams did. "You're making a mistake," Tamura said, falling back on what remained of his confidence. "I have the power to remake this world, to tear down the corrupt system and build something better. You're defending the old order, fighting for a society that's rotten to its core. We're not that different. We both know the system is broken. I'm just willing to destroy it and start over." "No." Saitama's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Not anger, but something firmer. Certainty. "We're completely different. You're not trying to fix anything. You're just breaking stuff because someone told you breaking stuff would give you what you want. That's not revolution. That's just being used." Tamura's eyes widened. Somewhere in the back of his mind, through the communication link that connected him to AFO, he heard his master's voice sharpen with concern. "Don't listen to him. He's trying to manipulate you. Finish the mission. Use the decay." "Who told you this would work?" Saitama asked, still walking. "Who convinced you that destroying everything was the answer? Because looking at you, looking at all those quirks that don't quite fit together, looking at how you move like someone wearing someone else's clothes, you're not in control here. Someone else is pulling the strings, and you're just the weapon they're using." "I am in control." Tamura's voice cracked. "Everything I've done, every choice I've made." "Not choice, us," Saitama interrupted. "There's no choice in destruction. Real choice is harder than that. It's deciding what to protect, what to build, what future you actually want, instead of just what you want to tear down. And I don't think you've made that choice at all. I think someone made it for you." The words hit harder than the punch had, because they were true. Tamura could feel AFO's presence like a weight in his mind, could feel the quirks that weren't his, burning under his skin, could feel the mission that had been implanted rather than chosen. "Tamura!" AFO's voice in his ear was sharp now, urgent. "Use the decay, full output, force his hand, make him." "Who said that?" Saitama asked. He was close now, close enough that Tamura could see his own reflection in those plain eyes. "Just now. Someone told you what to do. I saw your eyes shift. You're not even fighting your own fight. You're fighting someone else's war." Tamura's hands clenched decay, spreading from his fingers involuntarily. "I'm fighting for my future. For everyone who's been ignored by hero society. For future's not something one person decides. For everyone else," Saitama said, and his voice carried the weight of simple truth. It's something each person chooses for themselves. That's what makes it a future instead of a prison. You're not offering freedom. You're offering a different cage and calling it liberation because you're the one holding the keys. He stopped directly in front of Tamura, close enough to touch, close enough that any attack would be instant, unavoidable. "So here's my choice," Saitama said. "I'm going to stop you. Not kill you. You're just a kid who got handed too much power by someone who knew how to use you. But I'm going to stop you from hurting anyone else. And then you get to make a real choice, probably for the first time. What kind of person you want to be. What kind of future you actually want. Not what someone told you to want. What you choose." Tamura felt something break inside him. Not physically. Deeper than that. The certainty that had carried him through the transformation, through the attack, through everything, it cracked like glass under pressure. Because Saitama wasn't treating him like a villain to be defeated. He was treating him like a person who'd made bad decisions. And that was somehow worse. Tamura's voice was small, younger than it had been. I just wanted... Master said this was the only way. That hero society had to fall. That we had to... Tamura, ignore him. AFO's voice was shouting now. He's manipulating you. Use the quirks, all of them overload if necessary. Bring him down even if it destroys you in the process. And in that moment, hearing AFO's willingness to sacrifice him, Tamura understood what Saitama had been saying. He wasn't in control, had never been in control. He was a weapon pointed at a target by someone who'd spent months making sure he'd fire when triggered. Get out of my head, Tamura whispered. What? AFO's voice carried genuine surprise. Get out of my head. Tamura screamed it, and something in him broke free. Not all the way, not completely, but enough. Enough to feel the foreign presence that had been driving him, shaping his choices, making him into something he'd never agreed to become. AFO felt it too, felt his connection destabilizing, felt his carefully constructed weapon starting to think for itself. No. You can't, I made you. You're mine, you don't get to. Saitama hit Tamura again. Not in the body this time. In the chest, directly over where AFO's spiritual presence had taken root during the transformation. The punch was precise, controlled, carrying just enough force to disrupt without destroying. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. AFO's presence was expelled from Tamura's body like smoke through a broken window. The spiritual connection, the mental link, the parasitic relationship between master and weapon, all of it severed in an instant. Tamura felt quirks begin to shut down. Felt the foreign enhancements start to fade, felt himself becoming smaller, weaker, more human, and felt relief. He collapsed, not from damage, but from exhaustion that went beyond physical. The decay around him stopped spreading the paths that had been threatening evacuees, simply ceasing to exist. His enhanced durability failed. His regeneration slowed and stopped. He was just Tamura Shigaraki again. Not Tamura Omega. Not all for one's perfect weapon, just a young man who'd made terrible choices under terrible influence. Saitama caught him before he hit the ground. Easy, Saitama said, lowering him carefully. You're going to be okay. Might not feel like it right now, but you are. Around the battlefield, heroes and students watched in stunned silence. They'd expected a battle, expected destruction on a scale to match what had come before. Expected Saitama to punch until nothing remained. Instead, they'd witnessed something more powerful than any physical attack. They'd watched someone choose to see a person instead of a villain, to offer understanding instead of just judgment, to stop the fight not by destroying the enemy, but by freeing them from what had enslaved them in the first place. Stain stood slowly, his legs shaking. Did you see? He asked no one in particular. Did you all see what just happened? That's heroism. Not the punch. The choice to see him as savable. To give him a future instead of just an ending. Deku was crying, though he wasn't sure when the tears had started. Something about watching Saitama fight, not by overpowering, but by choosing the harder path, the more compassionate path, had broken something in him that needed breaking. All his life he'd wanted to be strong enough to win. Now he was seeing that sometimes the real strength was choosing what to win for. All Might sat in the rubble, looking at his hands. Hands that had once held the world's greatest power. Hands that had saved countless lives through overwhelming force. And he was wondering if, maybe, just maybe, he could have done more by choosing differently, by seeing people instead of just problems to punch away. In the distance, kilometers away, where he'd been coordinating the attack, All for One felt his connection sever and screamed. Decades of planning, months of transformation. The perfect weapon designed to eliminate the anomaly and prove that the old order remained supreme. All of it undone not through superior power, but through the simple act of refusing to play the game as designed. His rage was absolute world-ending. The fury of someone who'd just watched their masterpiece destroyed by an idiot who didn't even understand what he'd ruined. He would recover, would plan again, would build new weapons and try new approaches. But in this moment, he'd lost. Not just the battle, but the narrative. Because Saitama had proven that AFO's entire framework power through control strength, through domination, victory through calculated cruelty was incomplete. There were other paths, other possibilities, other ways of being strong, and now everyone knew it. Saitama stood leaving Tomura in the care of approaching medical heroes. He looked at his hand, flexing his fingers again. No damage, not even tired. Just another day of doing what needed doing. "Is it over?" someone asked. Saitama considered the question. The city was destroyed. People had died. The damage would take years to repair. But the immediate threat was stopped. The decay had ceased. The villain was down, freed from the influence that had driven him to this. "Yeah," Saitama said. "I think so." He started walking toward the evacuation routes, already thinking about what came next. About finding his way home. About whether this world's scientists had made any progress on the dimensional problem. About mundane concerns that had nothing to do with the momentous thing he'd just accomplished. Behind him, heroes began the work of rescue and recovery. Students coordinated with pros. Former enemies became patients. The battlefield transformed into a disaster relief site purpose, shifting from fighting to saving, from destruction to reconstruction. And watching it all from his rooftop kilometers away, Stain smiled through his tears. "The world changes now," he said again, this time with certainty. "It has to, because he showed us it can." The sun was setting over Musutafu, painting the destroyed city in shades of orange and gold. In that light, the rubble almost looked beautiful. Like something that could be rebuilt. Like a future that could be chosen. Like hope. 3 weeks passed before Musutafu stopped smoking. The fires were out within days, but the metaphorical smoke, the questions, the debates, the fundamental reassessment of everything. Hero society had built that lingered. It filled conference rooms and classrooms, news broadcasts, and dinner table conversations. The city was rebuilding its infrastructure, but the real reconstruction was happening in how people thought about power, about heroism, about human potential. UA reopened 2 weeks after the attack. The campus had been largely spared physical damage, but the institution itself had been shaken to its foundation. Principal Nezu stood before the assembled faculty, his small form somehow commanding complete attention. "We will be implementing changes," he said without preamble. "Starting with curriculum reforms. All students, regardless of quirk capability, will receive comprehensive hero training. We will no longer categorize students by power level, but by aptitude and dedication. Because we have learned at great cost that strength comes in forms we failed to recognize." Around the table, teachers nodded. Some reluctantly clinging to old frameworks. Others with genuine enthusiasm, finally given permission to question assumptions they'd never been allowed to challenge. Aizawa spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd watched his students nearly die. "What about the quirkless? Are we actually opening admissions, or is this just talk?" "We're opening admissions," Nezu confirmed. "And more than that, we're actively recruiting. Every child who was told they couldn't be a hero because they lacked a quirk deserves the chance to prove that assessment wrong. We owe them at least that much." The decision would ripple outward, forcing other hero schools to follow or be left behind. Within months, the first quirkless students would walk through UA's gates. Some would fail. Most would struggle. But a few would succeed, and their success would matter more than any textbook or training manual ever could. In Recovery Girl's medical wing, Deku sat up in bed for the first time since the battle. His injuries had been severe enough that even her quirk required time to fully heal him. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the mental reconstruction he'd been doing. His notebook lay open on his lap, filled with new entries. Not about quirks this time, but about choices. About what it meant to be strong when strength wasn't enough. About how Saitama had won, not by hitting harder, but by refusing to accept the terms of the fight as given. All Might visited daily, his skeletal form a stark reminder of mortality that neither of them could ignore anymore. Today he sat in the chair beside the bed, looking older than Deku had ever seen him. "I've been thinking," All Might said quietly, "about what I taught you. About what I should have taught you. I gave you power and called that enough. But watching him, he didn't need to specify who. I realized power was maybe the least important thing I should have given you. You gave me hope," Deku said. "You made me believe I could be a hero when everyone else said I couldn't. That matters. But I also made you think being a hero required one for all, required inherited strength. And that was wrong." All Might's hands clenched in his lap. "You could have been a hero without my quirk. It would have been harder, taken longer, looked different. But you could have. And by not telling you that, by not believing it myself, I perpetuated the same system I thought I was protecting." Deku absorbed this feeling, something shift in his understanding. "What do we do now?" "We do better," All Might said simply. "We teach the next generation that heroism starts with the choice to help, not with the power to dominate. We honor what he showed us by actually changing, not just talking about changing." Across campus in the administrative building, a meeting of a different sort was taking place. Hero Commission representatives, what remained of them after the attack, sat across from Nezu, attempting to reassert authority that no longer existed. The individual known as Saitama must be registered, the interim chairman insisted. His capabilities represent a potential threat that— "Stop," Nezu interrupted, his politeness evaporated. "I've listened to this argument for 3 weeks. The answer remains no. Saitama saved this city when our heroes couldn't. He stopped a threat specifically designed to counter him. He showed mercy when killing would have been easier. And now you want to treat him like a criminal because he makes you uncomfortable. We need accountability. You need control," Nezu corrected. "There's a difference. Accountability means recognizing when systems fail and fixing them. Control means forcing everyone into boxes so they're easier to manage. We've been doing the latter while calling it the former, and it nearly destroyed us." The commission representatives left empty-handed. Within a month, the commission itself would dissolve its authority, redistributed to regional councils with actual oversight and accountability. The change would be messy, controversial, incomplete. But it would be change, and that mattered. In the city proper, at a cafe that had survived the destruction, Stain sat across from Aizawa. An unlikely meeting between a wanted criminal and a pro-hero. But these were strange times, and stranger accommodations were being made. "I won't arrest you today," Aizawa said, his capture weapon coiled but ready. "But this doesn't mean I approve of your methods." "I don't need your approval," Stain replied. "But I am reconsidering my approach." Watching how he chose to save rather than simply destroy it, made me question whether my purge was ever going to accomplish what I hoped. "So what now? You stop killing heroes?" "I stopped killing anyone," Stain said, "because I realized something watching him fight. The system isn't the enemy. The acceptance of a broken system is. And you can't kill acceptance. You can only offer something better and trust people to choose it." "That sounds optimistic coming from you." "It sounds exhausting," Stain corrected. "But if someone like him can exist, someone who's that strong and that uncorrupted, then maybe the world actually can change. Maybe I don't need to be the blade that cuts away the rot. Maybe I can be something else." "Like what?" Stain smiled, and it was almost genuine. "I'll figure it out. I have time now. because I don't need to murder false heroes when real ones are finally starting to appear. He left before Aizawa could respond, disappearing into the afternoon crowd. Aizawa let him go. Some fights weren't worth having, and some people deserved the chance to choose differently. At the impact site where Tamura had been stopped, a small memorial had appeared. Not officially sanctioned, just something the citizens had created on their own. Flowers and notes and candles. Messages thanking the heroes who'd stood against impossible odds. Thanking the bald ghost who'd ended it. Saitama stood at the memorial's edge, reading some of the notes. They were kind, effusive, treating him like a savior. It made him uncomfortable. He'd just hit someone who needed hitting. That's what he did. The rest, the philosophy, the changing society, the reformation of hero education, that was other people's work. They'll want you to stay, a voice said behind him. Saitama turned to find Deku approaching, still moving carefully around healing injuries. The kid had been discharged that morning, immediately seeking him out. I know, Saitama said. UA offered me a teaching position. The government wants me to join some new hero council. Random people keep asking for autographs. He shrugged. But I don't belong here. I've got my own world, my own problems, my own grocery store that knows which vegetables I like. Did you find a way back? Yeah. Saitama gestured toward the research building. Your scientists figured out the dimensional signature. They can open a rift, send me through. Should work. He paused. Probably. When? Today. Couple hours. No point dragging it out. Deku felt something tighten in his chest. This person who'd changed everything, who'd broken every assumption he'd built his life on, was just going to leave, walk away like the monumental impact he'd had was just another Tuesday. Thank you, Deku said, for everything you taught us, for showing us that heroism could be different, that we could be different. Saitama looked at him, really looked at him, and something in his expression softened. You already knew that. You were quirkless once, right? You know what it's like to be told you can't do something. And you kept trying anyway. That's the important part. Not the power you got after. The trying before, but without one for all. You'd have found another way, Saitama interrupted. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe it would have looked different. But you'd have done it because that's who you are. The power just made it easier. It didn't make it possible. He started walking toward the research building, leaving Deku standing there processing. Then he stopped and turned back. Hey kid, one more thing. That future you're worried about, the one where you have to be the next symbol of peace and live up to All Might's legacy and save everyone. Yeah, that's not your future. That's a future someone else wrote for you. You get to write your own. That's what makes it yours. He waved once, casual and final. Take care of this place. It's got problems, but it's trying to fix them. That's more than a lot of places can say. 2 hours later, in a laboratory deep in UA's research wing, Saitama stood before a shimmer in the air that might have been a doorway, or might have been a catastrophic spatial rupture. The scientists weren't entirely sure, but the dimensional signature matched his home world, and that was enough. Nezu Aizawa All Might and a handful of students had come to see him off. No ceremony, no speeches, just a quiet farewell to someone who'd rather not be made a fuss over. If you ever find yourself back here, Nezu said, you'll always have a place at UA. Appreciated, Saitama said. But I'm hoping your dimensional barriers stay stable this time. One accidental universe hop is enough for anybody. He turned toward the rift, then paused. Looked back at the gathered heroes and students at the world he'd accidentally changed just by being himself. You'll be fine, he said. You've got good people, smart people, people willing to question things that need questioning. That's enough. You don't need someone like me. You just need to keep choosing to be better. And then he stepped through the rift. The transition was instantaneous. One moment in UA's laboratory, the next, standing in his apartment's living room, exactly where he'd been when the dimensional glitch had taken him. His discount flyer was still on the table. 3 days had passed for him. For this world, mere seconds. Saitama picked up the flyer, checked the dates, and headed for the door. The supermarket sale was still valid. He could grab those vegetables, make dinner, maybe watch some TV. Normal things. Mundane things. The kind of life he'd chosen and kept choosing despite having the power to choose anything. Behind him, in another universe, a world was learning to rebuild itself. Not just the physical structures, but the frameworks of understanding the systems of power, the definitions of heroism. It would take time. There would be setbacks. Old thinking would resist new possibilities. But standing in that laboratory watching the rift seal behind Saitama Deku smiled through tears, because he'd learned something crucial in these past weeks. Learned it from watching someone who didn't even realize he was teaching. The future wasn't something given to you by others or determined by your circumstances. It was something you chose every day through decisions large and small. Through standing up when standing up was hard. Through helping when helping seemed pointless. Through refusing to accept that limitations were permanent just because they'd always existed before. "Did you see?" Stain's voice echoed in his memory. That's heroism. And finally Deku understood. Not the power, not the strength, not the winning. The choosing. That's what made someone a hero. The simple, daily, unglamorous choice to try. Everything else was just details. The sun set over Musutafu, painting the rebuilding city in shades of hope and possibility. In the ruins, people worked side by side, quirked and quirkless hero and civilian. Old system and new thinking building something that might be better than what had come before. And somewhere in another universe, a bald man in a cheap apartment was making dinner completely unaware that he'd changed the course of an entire world, but aware that the vegetables were on sale, and that was enough.